Tonight, we begin a journey not into the loud clamor of the world, but into the quiet art of letting go, the wisdom found not in relentless grasping, but in the spaciousness of release. There is nothing you need to do here, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply allow your body to soften, your breath to deepen, and your mind to drift. Our stories often begin where our striving ends, where the hand unclenches and the heart finds its own gentle rhythm. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported, cradled by the stillness around you. We find ourselves in a world where time unfolds with the slow grace of a blooming flower, where the ancient rhythm of nature dictates the pace of life. Imagine, if you will, the serene hush of pre-dawn, where misty mountain peaks are just beginning to be kissed by the first soft light of a new day. Valleys lie sleeping, rivers flow with a soft, persistent murmur, and the air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting. It is a place of deep greens and soft grays, of weathered wood and river stone, where light filters gently through ancient leaves and paints long dancing shadows. Sounds are organic and soothing here, the distant call of a solitary bird, the whisper of wind through bamboo groves, the subtle crackle of a fire in a distant hearth, and always profound silence, not as an absence, but as a resonant space, a canvas upon which the world paints its subtle symphony. In this quiet world, nestled among those very peaks, stood a monastery, ancient and unassuming, and within its walls lived a young woman named Kusa. She was slender and agile, her form honed by the daily ascent to the monastery's bell tower. Her dark hair was usually tied back simply, often escaping in soft wisps around her earnest face. Her eyes, bright with devotion, often held a flicker of deep, unquiet frustration. Kusa wore practical, homespun robes, faded with the countless dawns and dusks, the countless climbs and descents. She was diligent, profoundly devoted to her role, to the sacred task she had been given, to ring the great morning bell, a sound meant to carry across the valley, awakening the world to a new day. Each dawn, long before the sun had fully lifted above the highest ridge, Kusa would begin her climb. Up the worn wooden steps she would go, her bare feet knowing every groove, every creak of the ancient timber. She would reach the top, the vast, silent valley stretching out below, still cloaked in the deep blues and purples of twilight. Her hands, small but strong, would grasp the thick, rough rope. Her muscles would strain as she pulled, pouring her entire being into the effort, guiding the heavy clapper to strike the bronze heart of the bell. She knew the bell's deep tone by the vibration that surged through her hands, by the tremor that ran through the tower itself, a deep, bodily resonance that shook her to her core. And she knew, too, the immediate, overwhelming clang that filled the small space of the belfry, a sound so immense it felt like it absorbed all other sound, all other thought. But she could never hear its true, resounding song, not the way it settled into the air far below, the way its melody truly carried, pure and clear, across the sleeping valley. She stood too close. Her very position, her very dedication, placed her in the heart of its immediate power, but beyond the reach of its far-flung grace. This was Kusa's quiet sorrow, her hidden ache. She yearned to hear it, to truly experience the beauty she helped create, to know the sound that stirred the distant villages to life. This yearning was a constant, restless whisper in her heart, a gentle disquiet that shadowed her diligent days. Her mornings became a canvas for elaborate schemes, for earnest attempts to capture the elusive sound. She was convinced that if she just tried hard enough, if she just found the right method, she could bridge the distance between her and the bell's true voice. She began with the birds. Gentle, patient, Kusa would spend hours in the monastery courtyard, observing the sparrows and swallows that nested in the eaves. She imagined their light bodies, carried by the morning breeze, could be her messengers. With delicate threads, finer than any spider silk, she would try to attach a tiny, almost invisible string to a bird's leg, hoping it would fly out across the valley, carrying with it a resonance, a vibration that would then travel back to her. She would sit, eyes wide, breath held, watching a bird take flight, the thread trailing behind it like a wisp of smoke, her heart aching with hopeful anticipation. But the thread would inevitably break, or the bird would fly in the wrong direction, or the string would simply be too short, too light to carry any discernible sound. She would sigh, a soft breath of disappointment. But the next morning, her determination would return, renewed. Perhaps a different bird, perhaps a stronger thread, perhaps a different knot. When the birds proved too wild, too independent for her grand design, Kusa turned her attention to the mechanical. She began to experiment with long poles, with hollow bamboo canes, with lengths of carefully dried gourd, joining them end to end, creating crude extensions that she hoped might carry the sound down the tower, away from the immediate, deafening clang. She would spend her afternoons, when her duties were done, diligently sanding, joining, and sealing these contraptions. Each morning, before she rang the bell, she would carefully position one of these long, unwieldy tubes, trying to direct its open end towards the valley, while the other end, she hoped, would bring the gentle echo to her ear. She would pull the rope, the great bell would roar, and Kusa would press her ear to the end of her carefully crafted tube, straining, listening with every fiber of her being. But all she heard was the wind whistling through the hollow, or the distant rustle of leaves, or the muffled, distorted thud of the bell's immediate impact. The true, far-reaching song remained elusive, refusing to be channeled, refusing to be contained by her ingenious, yet ultimately clumsy designs. Her forehead would furrow deeper, a tiny frown of quiet frustration etching itself between her brows. Her deepest, most desperate attempts involved others. Sometimes, when her yearning became almost unbearable, she would approach one of the elder monks, or a kind-faced novice, and, with a voice soft but determined, she would make her plea. "Please," she would whisper, her eyes earnest, "could you ring the bell for me this morning? Just this once. I wish to go down, to hear it from afar." The monks, understanding her quiet devotion, would always agree. And so, Kusa, instead of climbing the tower, would rush down the worn steps, her heart pounding with a different kind of anticipation. She would hurry through the monastery gates, down the winding path that led into the valley, her robes rustling softly against the dew-kissed grass. She would find a vantage point, a quiet hillock where the view of the monastery bell tower was clear, where the air was still and receptive. She would wait there, shivering slightly in the pre-dawn chill, her eyes fixed on the distant tower, her ears straining. Then she would see it, the faint movement of the rope, the glint of the bell in the first light, and then, a beat later, the deep, resonant bong would finally reach her. It was beautiful, yes, a sound that filled the valley with its gentle power, a sound that truly awakened the world. But it was not her sound. It was not the sound she had created, not the sound she had pulled from the bell with her own hands. It was always a little delayed, a little distant, and in that distance, she felt a profound disconnect. She was the one who woke the world, but she remained outside of the full experience of her own gift. The sound, when it finally reached her, felt like a message from a distant shore, not the vibrant, immediate reality she so desperately sought. Each time she would return to the monastery, her agile steps now heavy with a quiet weariness. Her bright eyes would hold a deeper flicker of disappointment, her forehead slightly more furrowed. She would climb the steps again, back to the silent bell, her hands automatically polishing the bronze, her mind churning with new ideas, new ways to try and capture what seemed to deliberately evade her. Her striving was earnest, her dedication absolute. But with each failed attempt, the gentle disquiet within her grew, a quiet testament to the theme of attachment to a specific outcome. By trying so hard to hear the bell's true, far-reaching sound, Kusa was, perhaps without realizing it, missing the simple, profound act of ringing it. The very effort to grasp the sound was creating a barrier, standing between her and the quiet truth she yearned for. She was too close, yet also, in her mind, too far. And so, the bell continued to ring, and Kusa continued to listen, and the true melody, for her, remained unseen, unheard. The nights grew longer, and the mornings colder, yet Kusa's quest for the bell's true song burned with an unwavering, if increasingly weary intensity. Each sunrise brought a fresh wave of determination, a renewed conviction that this time, this elaborate scheme, this clever device, would finally unlock the elusive melody. She tried stretching thin animal membranes across frames, hoping to capture the sound like a drum skin. She experimented with bowls of water, believing the vibrations might create ripples that would speak to her. She even tried to teach herself to read the subtle changes in the air currents, convinced that the wind itself carried the bell's signature, if only she knew how to interpret its invisible script. Her small room, usually neat and sparse, began to fill with her ingenious, yet ultimately futile, contraptions. Dried gourds, coiled ropes, stretched skins, all imbued with her earnest hope, all silent testaments to her persistent striving. But with each sunrise, with each failed attempt, a deeper weariness settled into Kusa's bones. The flicker of frustration in her bright eyes grew more pronounced, sometimes giving way to a profound sadness. She was dedicated, yes, devoted to her task, but the joy she once found in the simple act of ringing the bell was slowly being eclipsed by the relentless pressure of her yearning. The bell, which once felt like a friend, now felt like a riddle, a beautiful, powerful thing that deliberately withheld its most exquisite secret from her. Her steps up the worn wooden stairs became a little heavier, her hands grasping the thick rope with less of the eager anticipation and more of a quiet, almost desperate resignation. One morning, the pre-dawn sky was particularly dark, heavy with unspoken promise. A soft, cold mist clung to the mountain peaks, blurring the outlines of the distant trees. Kusa climbed the tower steps, her body feeling leaden, her mind a quiet echo chamber of all her past failures. The air was still, utterly silent, waiting. She reached the bell, its massive bronze surface cool beneath her fingertips. She looked at the rope, then at the vast, empty valley stretching out below, still cloaked in shadows. There were no new schemes in her mind this morning, no fresh ideas, no reserves of cleverness left to draw upon. Only exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seeped into her very soul. In that moment, standing before the great bell, with the weight of countless unanswered mornings pressing down upon her, something shifted. It was not a decision, not a thought, but a softening, a quiet giving up. Her striving, her grasping, her desperate need to hear the bell's true sound, all simply fell away. There was nothing left to try, no more solutions to invent, no more cleverness to deploy. Only the simple, profound reality of the rope in her hand, the bell before her, and the pre-dawn stillness. She took a breath, not a breath of anticipation or hope, but a breath of pure, unburdened release. And then, without thought, without caring what it would sound like, without any expectation of how its melody would or would not carry, she simply pulled the rope. Her muscles, accustomed to the movement, strained and released. The great bell roared its familiar, immediate clang, a violent tremor running through the tower. Kusa did not press her ear to a tube, did not strain to catch a vibration, did not rush down the stairs. She simply stood there, her body still, her mind quiet, watching the bell sway. And then, as the immediate clang faded, as the raw vibration in her hands began to dissipate, something else emerged. In the spaciousness that followed the strike, in the quiet afterspace where the sound was no longer erupting but receding, she heard it. A pure, crystalline resonance. A gentle, undulating wave of sound that seemed to rise from the very heart of the bell, carrying itself with effortless grace. It was not the deafening immediacy, but the lingering echo, not the collision, but the ripple. It was the bell's true, far-reaching song, unfolding itself in the silence after its powerful voice had filled the air. It was always there, always. Not in the forceful impact, not in the frantic search, but in the quiet, receptive space that opened once the striving had ceased. Kusa stood, tears pricking her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, gentle understanding. The truth she had pursued so relentlessly, the melody she had so desperately tried to capture, had revealed itself in the moment she stopped chasing it. It was not something she could grasp or force or contain. It was something that unfolded in the spaciousness of release, a gift given not to her effort, but to her surrender. Her heart, which had been a restless whisper, now settled into a deep, serene rhythm. She understood, with a clarity that went beyond words, that the bell's true sound was not an object to be possessed, but a living presence to be experienced. And the experience came not from standing too close, nor from running too far, but from simply being present to the natural unfolding of its voice, especially in its gentle fading. The act of ringing was not about the power of her pull, but about the spaciousness she allowed for the sound to be. This is a quiet truth, one that whispers to us from the heart of Kusa's journey. So often, we find ourselves like Kusa, diligently striving, ceaselessly searching for a specific outcome, a particular feeling, a perfect understanding. We believe that if we just work harder, if we just push a little more, if we just acquire a little more knowledge, we will finally grasp what we seek. We stand too close to our own efforts, deafened by the immediate clang of our striving, unable to hear the deeper, more resonant truths that emerge in the quiet afterspace. But what if the answers we seek are not found in relentless pursuit, but in the spaciousness that follows surrender? What if the very act of grasping, of trying to control, of desperately needing a specific result, is what prevents us from perceiving the truth that is already present? The bell's true sound, Kusa discovered, was not in the clamor of its strike, but in the silence that embraced its echo. The wisdom was not in the effort, but in the allowing. We, too, can learn from Kusa's quiet breakthrough. We can remember that sometimes The most profound revelations come not when we are striving with all our might, but when we finally release our grip, allowing ourselves to simply be. When we let go of the need to hear perfectly, to see clearly, to understand completely, it is then that the unseen melody of our own lives often begins to reveal itself. It is not an absence, but a presence, a resonant space. This is the gentle art of letting go, the profound wisdom found not in grasping, but in the spaciousness of release. It is a reminder that truth is often waiting for us in the stillness, in the quiet moments after the clamor has faded, in the open space of acceptance. Take a soft breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest, the quiet rhythm of your own being. Allow your mind to rest, to simply observe the spaciousness that exists always between each thought, between each sound, between each breath. In that space, a quiet wisdom waits. Having seen how release can reveal what striving obscured, how truth can unfold in the quiet afterspace of effort, our journey now turns to another, equally earnest soul. We leave the high, silent peaks of the monastery and descend into a gentle valley where a river winds its way through small, quiet villages, past fields of golden grain, toward the distant, unseen ocean. Here, in a small, unassuming house with a large window overlooking the valley, lived Master Ito, the map maker. Ito was a man etched with the patience of decades spent hunched over delicate parchment. He was 62 years of age, but his spirit often felt older, burdened by a quiet, persistent bewilderment. His hands, though gnarled with age, were precise and steady, accustomed to the delicate dance of quill and ink. A short, neat beard framed a kind face, though his eyes, magnified by years of close work, often carried a far-away, slightly bewildered look, as if perpetually trying to reconcile two different realities. He wore simple, well-mended tunics and trousers, practical garments that spoke of a life devoted to his craft, unconcerned with outward show. Ito was meticulous, dedicated to accuracy, and when he spoke, it was slowly, thoughtfully, often pausing as if consulting an invisible chart in his mind. For 40 years, Ito had dedicated his life to the art of cartography. His workshop was a sanctuary of order and precision, shelves laden with rolls of aged parchment, pots of ink in every shade of earth and sky, and an array of finely sharpened quills. On his large wooden table, illuminated by the soft, steady glow of a lamp during the long evenings, he would spread out his latest creation. He charted every stream, every path, every cluster of trees, every rise and fall of the land within the valley and far beyond. His maps were exquisite works of art, marvels of detail and accuracy, renowned throughout the villages for their unparalleled precision. Villagers relied on them for trade routes, for finding healing herbs, for understanding the lay of the land after a heavy rain or a shift in the river's course. They spoke of Ito's maps with reverence, as if they held the very essence of the world within their intricate lines. Ito, however, carried a secret, quiet frustration. Despite the perfection of his charts, despite the praise he received, he felt perpetually lost. Whenever he left his workshop, whenever he stepped out into the vibrant, ever-changing landscape he had so meticulously drawn, a strange uncertainty would creep into his heart. The world outside, the living, breathing world, refused to align with the static, perfect drawings on his parchment. He would walk the very paths he had spent weeks rendering, his eyes scanning the horizon, then glancing down at the map in his hand. The map showed a clear, unambiguous line, a path that wound around a hill and led to a specific grove of ancient pines. But the real path, bathed in the shifting sunlight, felt different. The light filtering through the leaves cast dancing shadows that changed the contours of the ground. A new fallen log might block a familiar turn. The river, so perfectly depicted as a blue line, murmured with 1,000 different voices as it flowed. Its banks subtly eroded here, built up there, a living entity that defied the fixedness of his ink. The trees, so uniformly green on his map, were in reality a riot of individual textures, colors, and rustling sounds. He felt a profound disconnect, as if the river on paper and the river in the world were two different things entirely. The map, in its absolute certainty, somehow created a barrier between him and the direct experience of the land. He would carry his maps, trying desperately to match the trees, the rocks, the bends in the path to their precise representations. He would pause, a furrow deepening between his brows, trying to force the fluid reality into the rigid framework of his paper world. But the landscape always felt fluid, alive, refusing to be contained by his ink and lines. It whispered and shifted, breathed and grew, indifferent to the meticulous boundaries he had drawn. This quiet struggle, this internal dissonance, grew with each passing year. Ito would return to his workshop, his heart heavy with a familiar, unspoken bewilderment. He would spread out the very map that had failed him, examining it with critical eyes. He would pore over every detail, convinced that the flaw lay not in his approach, but in an overlooked particularity, a missed nuance. He would sigh, the sound a soft exhalation of his ceaseless striving, and then he would begin to add more detail, more precision, more lines, more shading, convinced that the ultimate perfect map would finally orient him. He believed, with a profound and unwavering conviction, that if only he could capture everything on paper, if only his map could be an exact, immutable replica of the world, then he would finally understand. Then, he would no longer feel adrift. He would spend long evenings, his lamp casting a soft glow on his focused face, his quill scratching rhythmically across the parchment. He would add the exact number of stones in a particular riverbed, the precise angle of a tree branch, the subtle change in elevation of a barely perceptible rise in the land. He even tried to map the way the light fell at different times of day, creating layers upon layers of intricate, almost invisible annotations. He believed that more knowledge, more data, more control would bring clarity. He believed that if his map was perfect, then his experience of the world would also become perfect. But with each new detail, with each additional line, the map became heavier, more complex, and paradoxically, the gap between the paper and the living earth seemed to widen rather than close. The more he tried to contain the world, the more it seemed to elude his grasp. The more he sought certainty through his meticulous art, the more uncertain he felt when he stepped away from his table. His maps, which were meant to guide, had become an invisible veil, standing between him and the very landscape they purported to describe. He was trapped by his own precision, lost in the very details he believed would save him. His efforts, though born of a sincere desire for understanding, inadvertently distanced him from the direct, vibrant experience of the world. He was so busy trying to define the path that he forgot to simply walk it. He was so focused on the representation that he overlooked the reality. This is a quiet paradox, one that echoes in many of our own lives. How often do we, like Ito, become so engrossed in charting, in planning, in meticulously defining every aspect of our journey, that we inadvertently separate ourselves From the living, breathing experience of being on the path itself, we seek clarity through external validation, through accumulating more knowledge, through trying to control every variable, convinced that if we just have a perfect map, then our journey will be perfect. We believe that more information will bring more understanding. But what if, in our relentless pursuit of precision, we create a barrier between ourselves and the vibrant, ever-changing reality of life? What if the very act of trying to contain and define, of seeking absolute certainty, prevents us from experiencing the fluid, dynamic, and often unpredictable nature of existence? Ito, with his perfect maps, felt more adrift than ever, because he was trying to fit a living river into a static drawing, a breathing forest into an ink-filled outline. The world, in its beautiful, untamed essence, refused to be confined. And in that refusal, a deeper truth lay hidden, waiting to be discovered not through more effort, but through a different kind of seeing. So we leave Master Ito for a moment, hunched over his table, his quill scratching, still striving to capture what could not be held, and we too can pause to consider where in our own lives we might be trying to map the unmappable, to define the undefinable, to contain the uncontainable. Perhaps, like Ito, we are so focused on the map that we forget the territory, missing the quiet wisdom that whispers from the living landscape itself. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it. Feel the quiet rhythm of your own being. Allow your mind to rest, to simply observe the spaciousness that exists, always, between each thought, between each sound, between each breath. In that space, a quiet wisdom waits. In that space, a quiet wisdom waits. But for Master Ito, hunched over his maps, such space was difficult to find. He believed the world needed to be contained, charted, understood, before it could be truly navigated. He believed every line, every detail, every precise measurement brought him closer to the truth. Yet, the more he tried to capture, the more elusive the world felt. His mind, always striving for perfect clarity, remained clouded by the very complexity he created. Then, one quiet evening, as the last light faded from the sky and the scent of damp earth rose from the valley, the unexpected arrived. It came not with a roar or a sudden tempest, but with a subtle, insidious whisper. A stray ember, perhaps from a forgotten hearth, or a dry branch falling onto a smoldering leaf pile, began its slow, patient work. The flames, small at first, found purchase in the dry wood of Ito's workshop, then crept silently towards his life's work. Ito was not in his workshop that evening. He was, ironically, on a short walk, trying to reconcile the evening mist with the mist he had meticulously drawn on a regional climate chart. When he returned, a soft orange glow pulsed from his window, a light unlike the gentle flicker of his lamp. A profound stillness fell upon him, a quiet recognition that something irrevocable was unfolding. He rushed in, not with shouts or panic, but with a heavy, muted urgency. The flames had already taken hold. They danced with a quiet, mesmerizing energy, devouring not with fury, but with a patient, relentless hunger. The dry parchment, steeped in decades of dedicated work, became fuel. He watched, transfixed, as the intricately drawn rivers, the carefully etched mountain ranges, the delicate lines of his perfect paths, curled and blackened, then turned to drifting ash. The ink, once so permanent, evaporated into smoke, carrying with it the precise angles of tree branches, the exact number of stones in a riverbed, the subtle change in elevation of a barely perceptible rise in the land. The maps, his entire life's collection, the culmination of 40 years of meticulous effort, were consumed. Each sheet, a testament to his striving, became a fragile, glowing ember, then dissolved into nothingness, the air filled with the faint, acrid scent of burning paper, a smell that felt like the extinguishing of 1,000 tiny lights within him. His hands, gnarled and precise, now hung empty, devoid of the familiar weight of his quills or the smooth texture of parchment. A hollow ache settled in his chest, a bewildered emptiness where certainty had once resided. The perfect maps, the ones he believed would finally orient him, were gone. All of them. Before the ash had even cooled, before the smoke had fully cleared from his workshop, a messenger arrived. The news was urgent, spoken in hushed tones. A rare illness had spread through a remote mountain village, far beyond the familiar paths. Precious, life-saving medicine was needed, and it needed to be delivered immediately before the morning mist lifted. There was no time to wait, no time to redraw, no time to reconsider. The path was dangerous, treacherous, known only to a few, and the messenger, his face etched with worry, looked to Ito, the master mapmaker, for guidance. Ito looked at his empty hands, then at the charred remains of his life's work. There were no maps, not a single one. His heart, still heavy with the recent loss, now stirred with a quiet, unfamiliar fear. How could he navigate a landscape he had only ever known through paper? How could he guide himself, let alone others, through an unknown territory without the certainty of his charts? His mind, accustomed to precision, felt suddenly untethered, floating in a vast, uncharted emptiness. But the need was great. The villagers were depending on him. There was no choice but to go. He set out before dawn, the air cool and damp against his face. His usual satchel, once heavy with scrolls and instruments, felt strangely light against his hip. Every step felt tentative, an exploration into the unknown. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the terrain, not for landmarks he could cross-reference with a map, but for the subtle cues of the living earth itself. The first few hours were a quiet struggle. His mind kept reaching for the familiar comfort of a mental image, a charted route, a precise measurement. But there was nothing to grasp. There was only the uneven ground beneath his worn sandals, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant murmur of a river he could not place. He felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped of the very tools he believed made him capable. Yet, as the sun began to paint the sky with soft hues of rose and gold, something began to shift. He felt the earth beneath his feet, not as a mapped contour, but as a living surface. He noticed the gentle incline of the path, the way the pebbles shifted, the cool dampness of moss on the northern face of a rock, the warmer, drier texture of the sun-baked soil. He found himself placing his feet with more intention, feeling the subtle give and take of the ground, trusting the rhythm of his own steps. The whispers of the wind, once mere background noise, began to carry new meaning. It rustled through the bamboo in a particular way, sighing through the pines with a different tone, carrying the scent of damp leaves from the valley floor or the drier aroma of high mountain air. He found himself turning his head, not in search of a charted wind direction, but to simply feel its subtle shifts against his cheek, letting it guide his direction, almost imperceptibly, towards a sheltered pass. He began to read the rise and fall of the land with a different kind of eye, not through elevation lines on a map, but through the intuitive understanding that a distant peak meant a climb, that a darkening valley suggested a river. He noticed the way certain trees grew, leaning in a particular direction, or how the water flowed in small rivulets, always seeking the lowest point. He felt the warmth of the sun on his face, tracing its arc across the sky, understanding its movement not as a calculated trajectory, but as a felt presence, a natural compass. There was no thought of right or wrong, no internal debate about which path to choose. He simply moved. His body, untethered from the rigid instructions of his maps, began to remember an older, deeper wisdom. It was as if the landscape itself was speaking to him, not in lines and symbols, but in sensations, in feelings, in a profound, unspoken language that he had forgotten how to hear. He wasn't trying to match the trees, the rocks, the bends in the path to their precise representations anymore. He was simply with them. He moved through the dense forest, then ascended the rocky slopes, finding his way perfectly. He reached the remote mountain village just as the morning mist began to lift, the medicine safely in hand. The villagers, their faces etched with relief, greeted him as a true guide. As he looked back at the path he had traveled, a quiet recognition bloomed within him. The maps, in their quest for absolute definition, had inadvertently obscured the living truth. They had been a barrier, standing between him and the vibrant, ever-changing territory they described. His striving for perfect clarity on paper had kept him from experiencing the clarity that was always present in the direct, unmediated experience of the world. He had believed that more knowledge, more data, more control would bring understanding. But in the unexpected absence of his life's work, he discovered that true guidance often emerges not from what we hold, but from what we release. The maps, in their relentless pursuit of permanence, had been destroyed by the very impermanence they sought to contain. And in their ashes, Ito found a new freedom, a profound trust in his own innate wisdom, a wisdom that had been waiting beneath the layers of his meticulous efforts, waiting to be revealed once the striving ceased. He realized that the world could not be truly contained on a piece of paper, however perfect. It was a fluid, breathing, living entity meant to be felt and moved through, not merely observed from a distance. The path was not fixed, but a dynamic conversation between the earth and his senses. He had been so busy trying to define the path that he had forgotten to simply walk it. Now, without the definitions, he was truly walking. This quiet journey reminds us that our attempts to control and define, though often well-intentioned, can sometimes separate us from direct experience. We create elaborate plans, build intricate mental models, and accumulate vast amounts of information, believing that these concepts will provide us with certainty and understanding. But what if, like Ito's maps, these very constructions become a barrier between us and the living reality of the present moment? What if the answers we seek are not found in more information, but in the release of our need for control, in the spaciousness that opens when we trust our innate wisdom? The world, in its beautiful, untamed essence, refuses to be confined by our concepts. The path, in its ever-changing nature, invites us to simply walk it, to feel it, to breathe it in. True understanding, like the perfect wayfinding, Ito discovered, often emerges when we let go of our need to chart every step and simply allow ourselves to be present, to trust the whispers of the wind, the feel of the earth, the rise and fall of the land as our most reliable guides. Take a moment now to breathe. Feel the quiet rhythm of your own being. Allow your mind to rest, to simply observe the spaciousness that exists always, between each thought, between each sound, between each breath. In that space, a quiet wisdom waits. Our path now leads us to Ray, the incense master. She moves with an elegant stillness, her hands as graceful as the wisps of smoke she so artfully blends. Her dark hair, often pulled back in a severe yet beautiful style, frames a serene face that has brought comfort to countless souls. Her blends are renowned throughout the land, sought after for their calming properties, their ability to evoke memory, or to purify sacred spaces. Pilgrims journey long distances to acquire her creations, believing her touch imbues the incense with a unique, almost spiritual quality. Yet Ray carries a secret sorrow, a quiet ache that lies beneath her serene exterior. Like a hidden ember beneath cool ash, years ago, a mysterious illness stole her sense of smell, leaving her adrift in a world suddenly muted, stripped of its invisible perfume. She, the incense master, could no longer truly experience the very beauty she created. She felt like a fraud. How could she, who could not discern the subtle notes of jasmine from the deep earthiness of sandalwood by scent alone, continue to hold such a revered title? How could she guide others to moments of aromatic transcendence when her own world had become an olfactory silence? The paradox was a constant, heavy companion, pressing down on her heart. Her craft, once an intuitive dance of senses, became a meticulous, almost clinical process. She relied on ancient formulae passed down through generations and on the precise measurements she had painstakingly recorded before her sense faded. Her workshop, once a vibrant tapestry of evolving aromas, was now a quiet space where she worked by memory, by sight, and by touch. She would sift through powders, noting their subtle shifts in color, the fine texture of a ground resin between her fingertips, the slight weight of a dried petal. She became acutely aware of the visual language of her ingredients, the way certain woods splintered, the sheen of a particular spice, the delicate fragility of rare herbs. When she prepared a blend for a client, she would watch their faces, observing the soft sigh of contentment, the subtle widening of their eyes, the gentle inclination of their head as the first wisps of smoke curled upwards. Their reactions became her only mirror, reflecting back the beauty she could no longer directly perceive. Their joy was her proof, their satisfaction her solace, yet it never quite filled the hollow space within her own perception. It was like painting a magnificent landscape for others to admire, knowing you yourself were colorblind. The form was there, the composition, the technique, but the vibrant essence remained unseen. She longed for the return of that invisible symphony, the complex harmonies that once guided her hand. She missed the crisp, clean scent of morning air after rain, the warm, comforting aroma of roasted grains, the sharp, invigorating fragrance of pine needles in the forest. But most of all, she missed the nuanced language of her own ingredients, the way they spoke to each other, the stories they told through their unique perfumes. She felt as though a vital thread had been cut, severing her from the very essence of her identity, from the soul of her craft. In her quiet desperation, Ray began a search, not a loud, public quest, but a silent, private pilgrimage, a journey of hope and quiet disappointment. She sought out healers in remote mountain hermitages, their faces etched with wisdom and time. She listened patiently as they prescribed strange tinctures brewed from rare mountain herbs, or led her through intricate breathing exercises, promising to clear stagnant pathways. She would dutifully follow their instructions, her heart fluttering with a fragile hope, only to find the world remained stubbornly unscented. She journeyed to bustling coastal towns, seeking those who claimed to have mastery over the body's hidden currents. One elder, whose hands were said to feel the very pulse of the earth, suggested a diet of only white foods for a lunar cycle, believing it would purify her internal landscape. Ray ate rice and pale fish, drank only clear spring water, but the invisible curtain remained. Another, a master of ancient chants, led her through long, resonant intonements, believing the vibration would awaken dormant senses. Ray chanted until her throat was hoarse, feeling the deep rumble in her chest, but the air around her still held no fragrance. She even sought out mystics who claimed to commune with spirits, hoping that a forgotten ancestor or a benevolent nature deity might intervene. They offered her intricate rituals involving offerings of flowers and burning prayers, promises of dreams that would reveal the cure. Ray performed each ritual with earnest devotion, her mind open, her heart yearning, but her dreams remained her own, and the world remained silent to her nose. Each failed attempt chipped away at her fragile hope, leaving behind a subtle residue of weariness. She would return to her workshop, the familiar scent of wood and dried herbs, now only a memory, a phantom whisper in her mind. She would continue to blend, to create, to serve her clients with the same serene grace. But the private ache grew deeper. She believed that her sense of smell was not merely a physical faculty, but an essential component of her being, a fundamental part of her connection to her art, and without it, she felt incomplete, perpetually inadequate. She saw the incense smoke rise. She felt the warmth of the ash. She heard the soft rustle of leaves as she gathered new ingredients, but the rich, complex tapestry of aroma remained just beyond her grasp. She was close, so very close, to the heart of her craft, yet eternally separated from its most defining characteristic. Her days were filled with the visible beauty of her work, but her nights were often spent in quiet contemplation of what was lost, of the unseen aroma that defined her very purpose. She believed that only by reclaiming this lost sense could she truly be whole, truly be the incense master she was destined to be. Her longing was not for a trivial sensation, but for a profound reconnection, a restoration of a vital link to the world and to herself. She yearned for the return of the unseen aroma, convinced that her true self was held captive by its absence. The winter night had settled over the quiet village, a soft blanket of silence that muffled even the distant murmur of the river. Inside Ray's workshop, a single oil lamp cast a warm, steady glow, illuminating the delicate powders, the small, polished tools, and the intricate patterns of dried herbs that covered her long wooden table. The air was still, holding the ghosts of countless aromas, a silent symphony that Ray's mind could conjure, but her senses could not confirm. Tonight, the familiar ache of absence felt particularly acute. The last healer she had visited, a kind woman who spoke of inner visions, had left Ray with a sense of quiet resignation. She had tried everything, it seemed, every path, every promise, and still, the world remained unscented. Ray picked up a small, intricately carved censer, her fingers tracing the cool, smooth lines of its surface. She had been tasked with creating a special blend for the winter solstice, an incense meant to draw forth feelings of inner peace and quiet renewal. Usually, such a creation would be a joyful, intuitive process, a dance between memory and inspiration. Tonight, it felt like a heavy burden, a performance she was no longer sure she could truly deliver. She began her work, her movements precise and practiced, honed over decades. She spooned fine sandalwood powder into a mixing bowl, then added a pinch of dried frankincense resin, its amber crystals catching the lamplight. Next, a scattering of dried cypress needles, their visual texture distinct from the fine powders. She worked by memory, by the weight of each ingredient in her palm, by the subtle resistance of the pestle as she ground them together. The scents she imagined were vivid in her mind, a symphony of deep wood, earthy spice, and sharp, clean green. But the air around her remained a blank canvas as she mixed. A small stray breeze, a whisper from a poorly sealed window, stirred the air. A tiny wisp of cypress powder lifted, swirling momentarily in the lamplight before settling back into the bowl. Ray paused, her eyes following the minute dance. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, yet she watched it with an unusual intensity. She had always seen the smoke, of course, observed its patterns as part of her craft. But tonight, there was a subtle shift in her attention. It was no longer simply a visual confirmation of combustion. It was something more. She carefully placed a small amount of the freshly blended powder onto a heated charcoal disc in the censer. A thin, ethereal column of smoke began to rise. Ray leaned closer, her breath held, not in expectation of a scent, but in pure, unadulterated observation. The smoke, usually a secondary indicator of the aroma, now took center stage. It was not a simple, uniform thread. It began as a delicate, almost invisible shimmer, a disturbance in the air, then solidified into a pale silver-gray plume. It rose slowly, steadily, twisting gently upon itself, like a dancer performing a silent, graceful spiral. As it reached the cooler air above, it softened, widening slightly, its edges blurring into a translucent halo before finally dissipating into the quiet space of the workshop. Ray watched, mesmerized. She saw how the light caught the tiny particles, making them sparkle like dust motes in a sunbeam. She noticed the subtle shifts in the smoke's density. With each small addition of a new ingredient to the charcoal, the column would momentarily thicken, or thin, or change the speed of its ascent. It was as if the incense itself was speaking, communicating its essence not through fragrance, but through form and movement. She experimented, adding a touch of dried lavender. The smoke became lighter, more ephemeral, rising in quicker, more playful curls. Then, a hint of patchouli. The smoke grew heavier, darker, clinging to the air for a longer moment, creating small, swirling eddies before finally dissolving. She saw the story of each ingredient unfold before her eyes, a visual narrative of its unique character. The light, airy lavender danced, the grounding patchouli lingered. It was then that she noticed the air itself. It wasn't just the smoke that moved, the very atmosphere around the censer seemed to change. She felt a subtle warmth emanating from the burning charcoal, a gentle heat that caressed her fingertips as she reached out. But beyond that, there was a different kind of change, a subtle texture to the air. With the heavier, richer blends, the air around the censer seemed to grow denser, almost viscous, as if she could push her hand through it and feel a slight resistance. With the lighter, more delicate blends, the air felt expansive, open, almost shimmering with a subtle energy. She had always felt the warmth, but had never truly noticed this subtle shift in the air's quality, its imperceptible weight, its delicate fluidity. She brought her hand closer to the rising smoke, not to test for a phantom scent, but to feel its presence. The smoke, though visually insubstantial, had a delicate, almost silky quality against her skin. It was not merely air, it was air imbued with something, a subtle emanation that registered as a faint, almost electrostatic tingle. She closed her eyes, not in despair, but in an attempt to heighten her other senses, to truly feel what was happening. The workshop, usually a silent space, now seemed to hum with subtle activity. She heard the faint, almost unheard crackle of the charcoal, a whisper of consumption. She felt the gentle currents of air stirred by the rising smoke, a soft, unseen breath moving through the room. The warmth, the visual dance, the subtle texture of the air, the faint sound. It was all there, a rich tapestry of sensation. And in that moment, a profound, gentle understanding bloomed within her, like a quiet flower unfurling in the deepest part of winter. She had been so consumed by what was absent, her sense of smell, that she had been blind to the richness of what remained. She hadn't lost her connection to the incense. She had simply been perceiving it through a different lens, a broader spectrum of senses than she had previously acknowledged. Her craft was not just about fragrance. It was about the visual poetry of the smoke, the subtle thermodynamics of the burning elements, the almost imperceptible changes in the very atmosphere of a room. It was about the delicate dance of light and shadow on the swirling wisps, the tactile sensation of warmth and air movement, the quiet sound of transformation. She hadn't lost her connection. She had simply been searching for it in only one corner of a vast, multi-sensory room. The irony was not lost on her. In her desperate pursuit of a lost sense, she had overlooked the symphony of other senses that had continued to play all along, quietly, patiently, waiting for her to truly listen, to truly see, to truly feel. Her perceived inadequacy, her feeling of being a fraud, began to dissolve like the very smoke she was observing. She realized that her inability to smell had not diminished her craft. It had, in a strange and unexpected way, deepened it. It had forced her to open her perception, to become acutely aware of the unseen melodies played by other senses. She was not an incense master who could not smell. She was an incense master who perceived the incense in its entirety, through its many forms and manifestations. She saw the incense, felt the incense, heard the incense, knew the incense, not as an absence, but as a presence, a holistic experience that transcended the limitations she had imposed upon it and upon herself. The longing, the quiet desperation that had been her constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder and gratitude. The hollow space within her perception, once so acutely felt, was now filled, not by the return of scent, but by the expansive realization of a richer, more complete way of knowing. She had been searching for a single thread, when all along she had been holding the entire tapestry. Her unique situation, once a source of shame, now became a unique strength. She understood the incense in a way others perhaps could not. She understood its visual language, its atmospheric presence, its subtle energy, its profound effect on the space around it. Independent of its aroma, she could guide others to experience incense, not just through their noses, but through their eyes, their skin, their very breath. She had found a new, profound way to be whole, to be connected, to be truly present with her craft. This gentle understanding reminds us of a profound truth. Often, when we believe something essential has been lost, when a vital part of our experience seems to vanish, our focus becomes singularly fixed on that absence. We spend our energy, our longing, our very being, trying to reclaim what is gone, convinced that our wholeness depends entirely on its return. We search, we strive, we ache, and in that intense focus on what is missing, we inadvertently turn our gaze away from the richness that remains, from the vibrant tapestry of life that continues to unfold around us and within us. Ray's journey teaches us that true perception is not limited to a single sense, nor is wholeness dependent on the fulfillment of a single expectation. It is an invitation to broaden our awareness, to open ourselves to the myriad ways in which life communicates its beauty and truth. when one doorway seems closed, countless others stand open, waiting for us to step through, to discover new landscapes of experience. We are often so caught in the story of what should be or what was that we fail to see the profound beauty of what is. The present moment, in its entirety, with all its perceived imperfections and absences, holds an abundance of richness, a symphony of sensations, a quiet wisdom waiting to be perceived, if only we would shift our focus. It is in letting go of the desperate need for things to be a certain way that we open ourselves to the truth of how they already are and discover a deeper, more expansive understanding. Just as Ray discovered the incense through its dance, its warmth, its subtle atmospheric presence, we too can discover the fullness of our own lives by embracing all that is present, rather than dwelling on what feels absent. This is the quiet art of holistic perception, of finding completeness not in what we gain, but in the spaciousness of accepting what remains. We pause now for a soft breath. Let your body relax, feeling the gentle rhythm of your own inhalation and exhalation. Let the understanding of Ray's quiet wisdom settle within you, a subtle warmth spreading through your being. Feel the richness of this present moment, just as it is, without needing it to be anything more or anything less. We journey now, gently, to the whispering edge of the land, where the vast, ancient breath of the ocean meets the steadfast shore. Our path leads us to Nami, a woman whose life was woven into the intricate rhythms of the tides, a legacy passed down through generations of her family. They were the tide readers, those who understood the ocean's subtle language, predicting its swells and ebbs with an almost uncanny precision. Nami, now 32 years of age, carried this lineage with a profound sense of duty, a weight that settled upon her lean shoulders, hinting at a quiet anxiety beneath her calm exterior. Her skin was kissed by the sun, her hair often braided with small shells and sea glass, a testament to her constant presence by the water. Her gaze, keen and intelligent, was almost perpetually fixed on the distant horizon, as if she could, through sheer force of will, unravel the ocean's every mood, calculate its every shift. From her earliest memories, Nami had been taught to observe, to record. Her family believed that understanding came through meticulous data, through the careful charting of lunar cycles, wind patterns, atmospheric pressures, and the subtle currents that flowed beneath the surface. For years, Nami had embraced this tradition, throwing herself into her studies with an intensity that left little room for anything else. She filled countless books with her observations, her elegant, precise script detailing every wave height, every minute variation in the water level, every whisper of the wind against the cliffs. Her small, humble dwelling, perched precariously on a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea, was overflowing with these journals, with charts meticulously drawn and redrawn, with complex formulae scrawled on parchment, each line an attempt to capture the elusive truth of the ocean. She spoke with a precise, almost scholarly tone, often citing her findings, referencing her calculations, yet always, with an underlying tremor of doubt that she could not quite conceal. For all her relentless study, for all her intricate equations, Nami could not truly master the tides. Her predictions, though often close, lacked the effortless accuracy that had defined her ancestors. She found herself constantly adjusting, recalculating, her perfect charts often failing to align with the living, breathing reality of the sea. The shame of this perceived failure gnawed at her, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. She felt as though she were breaking a sacred chain, tarnishing a legacy of deep, intuitive knowing. How could she, with all her knowledge, all her education, all her books, falter where her forebears had excelled. The ocean, in its vast indifference, seemed to mock her efforts, refusing to conform to the elegant patterns she had so painstakingly created on paper. It flowed and ebbed as it pleased, sometimes gentle, sometimes tempestuous, always just beyond the reach of her most meticulous calculations. She remembered, with a pang of envy that she tried to suppress, her grandfather. He had been a man of the sea, his hands gnarled by rope and sun, his face a map of kindness and profound wisdom. He had possessed an effortless ease in his predictions, a quiet certainty that Nami, despite all her striving, could not replicate. She would watch him, sitting silently on the smooth, wet stones at the water's edge, his eyes half closed, his posture relaxed, almost merging with the rhythm of the waves. He would offer a simple pronouncement about the coming tide, a gentle whisper of what the ocean would do, and he was always, unfailingly, correct. Nami had spent years trying to understand his methods, poring over his old journals, though they contained no numbers, no equations, only sparse, almost poetic observations about the color of the sky, the flight of a seabird, the feel of the wind on his skin. She believed there must be a hidden system, a complex underlying algorithm that he, in his wisdom, had simply not bothered to record in full. She was convinced that if she could only gather more knowledge, if she could just find that one missing variable, that one perfect formula, she would finally unlock the ocean's secret. So, she continued her relentless pursuit, rising before dawn, her lamp casting a pale circle on her charts, her quill scratching tirelessly across the parchment. She would watch the sun rise, painting the sky with hues of fire and gold, but her focus remained on the tide gauges she had constructed, on the intricate dance of numbers she hoped would reveal the ocean's heart. She studied the currents, the salinity, the changing temperatures, the subtle influence of distant storms. She measured, she recorded, she analyzed, convinced that the key lay in more data, more precision, more intellectual effort. Each day was a renewed battle against the ocean's perceived inscrutability, a fresh attempt to impose order upon its wild, untamed nature. She felt the weight of her family's expectations, the silent judgment of generations of tide readers who had, seemingly, understood what she could not. Her own self-worth became inextricably linked to her ability to predict the tides with absolute certainty, to prove herself worthy of the legacy she bore. Yet, despite her diligence, despite the mountains of data she amassed, the ocean remained just out of her grasp. It was like trying to hold water in a sieve. The more she tried to contain it, to define it, to force it into her intellectual frameworks, the more it slipped through her fingers, laughing silently in its endless fluid dance. The precise, scholarly tone she employed masked a growing weariness, a deep-seated frustration that threatened to consume her. She would spend long hours by the shore, her bare feet sinking into the cool, damp sand, the rhythmic roar of the waves a constant, powerful presence. But even then, her mind was not at peace. It was a whirlwind of calculations, of comparisons between observed reality and predicted outcome, of frantic attempts to reconcile the two. She saw the ocean not as a living entity, but as a complex problem to be solved, a vast, intricate puzzle that demanded more and more of her intellectual energy. The beauty of the sunrise, the cry of the gulls, the scent of salt in the air, these things registered only peripherally, background noise to the insistent churning of her analytical mind. She felt a profound disconnect, a chasm between the living, breathing ocean before her and the abstract, numerical representation she held in her mind. her books, her charts, her equations. They had become a thick veil, obscuring the simple, direct experience of the water itself. She believed that if she could only accumulate enough knowledge, if she could just perfect her calculations, the ocean would finally yield its secrets, and she would find her place, secure and respected, within her lineage. But in her relentless striving, in her desperate pursuit of intellectual mastery, she was, unknowingly, drowning out the very whispers of the ocean she so desperately sought to hear. She was building walls of numbers and theories, separating herself from the intuitive understanding that had been the true heart of her family's gift. Her mind was full, overflowing with data, leaving no space for the simple, profound truth that lay just beyond her grasp, waiting to be felt, not measured. Then, one quiet morning, touched by the soft, diffused light that often precedes a change in the weather, the village learned of her grandfather's passing. He had simply slipped away in his sleep, a gentle tide receding from the shore, leaving behind a profound stillness that settled over the coastal community. Nami felt the familiar pang of grief, a hollow ache in her chest. But beneath it, a quiet determination hardened. Now, truly, the legacy rested solely on her shoulders. She felt the weight of it, not just the expectation, but the unspoken mystery of his effortless gift, a gift she still, despite all her striving, could not fully claim. She went to his small, humble cottage, a dwelling even simpler than her own, filled with the scent of salt and old wood. Her task was to tend to his few belongings, to honor his memory by carefully sorting through the remnants of a life lived in quiet harmony with the sea. She expected to find them, tucked away in some forgotten chest, perhaps beneath a loose floorboard, his secret journals, his hidden charts, the intricate calculations that must surely have guided his unerring predictions. She searched meticulously, with the same precision she applied to her own tide tables, her fingers tracing the rough-hewn surfaces of his wooden chest, peering into the dim corners of his small shelves. But there was nothing. No ledgers filled with numbers, no scrolls covered in mathematical symbols, no diagrams of lunar pull or oceanic currents. His belongings were sparse, a worn fishing net, mended countless times, its knots telling stories of patience and perseverance, a smooth, wave-tumbled stone he always kept in his pocket, a simple wooden bowl for his morning meal, and a small leather-bound book, its pages thick with the dust of years. Nami picked up the book, her heart quickening. This must be it, she thought, the hidden key. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded script, anticipating the complex equations, the elegant proofs of his mastery. But the words were unfamiliar. They were simple, almost childlike strokes, clearly not the intricate characters of the scholars, nor the flowing script of her own learned hand. It was then, as she turned another page, and then another, that the truth, gentle yet utterly profound, unfolded before her. Her grandfather, the great tide reader, the man whose predictions had guided generations, had been illiterate. He had never used calculations. He had never consulted a single chart. The realization washed over Nami like a slow, steady wave, stripping away layers of her own carefully constructed understanding. The sudden, stark clarity was almost painful. All her life, she had believed his wisdom to be rooted in a hidden, complex system, a deeper, more profound form of the very intellectual mastery she so desperately pursued. And now, she saw. The simple, almost crude markings in the book were his attempts to replicate the stories her grandmother would read to him, not his own intricate studies. He had known the sea not through numbers, but through a different kind of language entirely, He had simply sat by the water. He had felt its subtle shifts. He had sensed the deep, unspoken rhythm of the tides, not as a problem to be solved, but as a living conversation. He had allowed the ocean to speak to him directly, in the language of sensation, of intuition, of pure, unadulterated presence. Her own calculations, Nami realized with a sudden, aching understanding, had not been illuminating the ocean's truth. They had been drowning out its direct communication. Her meticulous charts, her overflowing journals, her intricate formulae. They had been a thick, impenetrable wall, separating her from the very whispers of the ocean she so desperately sought to hear. She had built her intellectual fortress so high, so strong, that she had inadvertently blocked out the simple, clear light of innate knowing. A profound stillness settled within her, a quiet echo of the stillness that had enveloped her grandfather's cottage. The tremor of doubt that had always resided beneath her precise, scholarly tone now shifted, transforming into a tremor of revelation. She looked out the small, sea-facing window at the endless expanse of the water, no longer seeing a puzzle to be solved, but a vast, living presence inviting her into its rhythm. That evening, Nami did not light her lamp. She did not open her journals. She did not reach for her quill or her parchment. Instead, she walked down to the shore, her bare feet finding the familiar path to the smooth, wet stones where her grandfather used to sit. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and damp earth. The moon, a thin crescent, cast a silvery sheen upon the gently lapping waves. She sat, just as he had, on the smooth, cool stones, allowing the gentle lapping of the waves to wash over her. She closed her eyes, not to block out the world, but to open herself to it in a different way. She felt the subtle rise and fall of the water at her feet, the soft, persistent murmur of the ocean against the shore. She felt the coolness of the air on her skin, the subtle shift in the breeze, the distant cry of a night bird. She felt the weight of her body against the earth, connected, grounded. There was no striving now, no desperate need to understand, to calculate, to predict. There was only the spaciousness of presence, a quiet willingness to receive. She allowed her mind to empty itself of the swirling numbers, the complex theories, the endless analyses. She let them drift away, like scattered leaves on a gentle breeze, creating an open, receptive space within her. And in that space, the ocean began to speak. It spoke not in words, but in sensations. The subtle push and pull of the currents against her ankles, the slight change in the rhythm of the waves, a fractional pause, a deeper sigh, the delicate dance of the air carrying the scent of distant rain, signaling a shift in atmospheric pressure. She felt the profound gravitational pull of the moon, not as an abstract force, but as a palpable internal tug, a deep response within her own being. She realized then that her grandfather's wisdom had not been a method to be learned, but a state of being to be inhabited. It was an attunement, a resonance, a deep listening that transcended the limitations of intellect. The ocean's secrets were not hidden in formulae, but revealed in the quietude of an open heart, in the stillness of a mind willing to surrender its need to control. Days turned into weeks, and Nami continued her new practice. She still observed, but now with a different quality of attention. Her gaze was softer, her breath deeper, her body more relaxed. She would sit for hours by the water, her eyes often closed, simply feeling, simply listening. The beauty of the sunrise, the cry of the gulls, the scent of salt in the air, these now registered not as background noise, but as integral parts of the ocean's symphony, each element a note in its vast, unseen melody. Her predictions began to return, not through calculations, but through a quiet, inner knowing that surprised even her. She would simply feel a certain shift, a subtle inclination, and the words would form, not from effort, but from intuition. And she was, unfailingly, correct. Her predictions now carried the same effortless accuracy, the same quiet certainty that her grandfathers had possessed. It was not her intellect that had grown sharper, but her capacity for direct experience, her willingness to trust the wisdom that flowed through her, rather than trying to force it into a rigid framework. She understood that the true mastery of the tides was not found in dominating the ocean, but in harmonizing with it. It was not about imposing her will, but about allowing herself to be guided by its ancient living wisdom. The burden of her family's legacy had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of belonging, a deep connection to the lineage not through imitation, but through genuine, felt understanding. The ocean, which had once seemed to mock her, now embraced her, revealing its truths in a gentle whisper, a soft caress, a rhythmic heartbeat that resonated within her own soul. This quiet journey of Nami, the tide reader, reminds us of the profound power of intuition, of the subtle, internal knowing that often lies dormant beneath layers of intellectual striving. How often do we, in our pursuit of understanding, fill our minds with so much data, so many theories, that we drown out the quiet whispers of our own inner wisdom? We search for answers in external sources, in books, in experts, in complex analyses, believing that more information will bring clarity. But sometimes, the truest answers are found not in what we accumulate, but in what we release. Not in what we calculate, but in what we simply allow ourselves to feel. When we quiet the insistent churning of the analytical mind, when we create space for stillness and receptivity, we open ourselves to a deeper form of communication. We begin to hear the subtle rhythms of life, the unspoken truths that reside in the present moment, waiting patiently to be perceived. This inner wisdom is not a skill to be acquired, but a state of being to be inhabited. It is a trusting in the innate intelligence of our own bodies, our own spirits, our own connection to the vast, living tapestry of existence. Just as Nami discovered the ocean's truth by simply sitting and feeling, we too can find profound guidance by releasing our need to control, to analyze, to intellectualize every moment. We can learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with our entire being, allowing life to speak to us directly. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported. We breathe gently. Our next encounter takes us away from the ocean's vastness and into the bustling heart of a vibrant market, a place alive with the calls of vendors, the chatter of crowds, the clatter of wares, and the distant melody of a street musician. Here, amidst the clamor, we find old Masa. Masa was a gentle, unassuming man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles that creased into a warm, knowing smile. His white hair was thin and wispy, like the first breath of winter air. He moved slowly and deliberately, his simple, patched clothes blending into the background, yet there was a quiet dignity in his posture. His eyes, though they had seen much of the world's clamor, held a particular softness, a deep, gentle understanding. Masa spoke with a soft, melodic voice, a comforting presence for those who sought his unique service. For decades, Masa had offered a most unusual commodity in the noisy market. He sold moments of silence. People would approach his small, unassuming stall, often looking harried, their faces etched with the strain of daily life. They would whisper their requests, perhaps for a moment of quiet to weigh a difficult decision, or simply to rest their minds from the incessant din. Masa would nod, his smile gentle, and then, in a way no one truly understood, he would create it. He had no special tools, no magical incantations. He would simply invite the person to sit on a small, worn cushion before him, close their eyes, and breathe. Then, Masa would close his own eyes, and as he did, a profound stillness would begin to emanate from him, a palpable pocket of quietude that seemed to absorb the surrounding noise. The market sounds would not vanish entirely, but they would recede, becoming distant murmurs, like the gentle rush of a faraway river. Within this quiet pocket, people found solace. They would emerge from their moments with Masa looking refreshed, their shoulders visibly relaxed, a newfound clarity in their eyes. They would thank him profusely, pay him a small coin, and return to the market, carrying a piece of that stillness with them. Masa's reputation grew, and his stall was never empty for long. Yet beneath his calm exterior, behind the gentle smile and the knowing eyes, Masa's own mind was a whirlwind. The profound silence he so effortlessly created for others never seemed to last for himself. The moment a client departed, the stillness would dissipate, and the market's cacophony would rush back in, amplified by the brief respite, and with it, a relentless inner noise would return. Masa's mind churned constantly. He worried about maintaining the quiet for his clients, fretting over the subtle shifts in the market's rhythm, the sudden cry of a child, the unexpected clang of a dropped pot. He would mentally review his techniques, wondering if there was a better way to deepen the silence, a more effective method to keep the noise at bay. He believed that if only he could perfect his approach, if only he could control the external environment more completely, then perhaps, just perhaps, that precious silence would settle within him too. He spent his evenings in his small, quiet room, away from the market, yet his mind still raced. He would try to meditate, to sit in stillness, but the echoes of the day's clamor would persist. He would hear the imagined shouts, the remembered laughter, the phantom rhythms of the market drum. He would replay conversations, strategize for tomorrow's quietude, and worry about the quality of the silence he had offered that day. His own pursuit of silence had become its greatest impediment, a constant, active striving that prevented any true stillness from taking root. It was a profound paradox. Masa, the master of external silence, was perpetually restless within. He was like a weaver who creates magnificent tapestries for others, but whose own clothes are patched and worn. He was a beacon of peace, yet his own heart was a flurry of activity, caught in the endless loop of producing, perfecting, and pursuing. He believed silence was a thing to be manufactured, a product of his efforts, and in that belief, he unknowingly built a wall between himself and the very peace he sought. He would watch his clients walk away, their faces serene, a quiet glow about them, and a subtle ache would settle in his own chest. He was happy for them, of course. His service brought them comfort, and that was a good thing. But a part of him longed for that same deep, unshakable quietude for himself, a stillness that didn't rely on a client's presence or the precise conditions of the market. He yearned for a silence that was not an absence of noise, but a fullness of peace, a state of being that he could inhabit. Rather than a commodity he had to continually create and defend. He tried various remedies. He would rise before dawn, seeking the pre-market quiet, only to find his mind already busily planning the day's silences. he would retreat to the nearby temple, hoping the sacred space would impose its stillness upon him. But his thoughts would follow, tenacious and unwelcome. He would even try to replicate his method on himself, sitting on his cushion, closing his eyes, and willing the silence into existence. But it was always a forced silence, a fragile thing that crumbled the moment his attention wavered. Masa felt a quiet frustration, a gentle weariness that settled deep in his bones. He was a master of his craft, renowned for his unique ability. Yet he felt like an imposter in his own life, unable to experience the very essence of what he provided to others. He was so busy selling silence, so focused on producing it for the external world, that he had no space left to simply receive it, to simply be with it. His hands were full, his mind was full, and in that fullness, there was no room for the quiet peace he so desperately desired. He was, in essence, drowning in the noise of his own efforts, the clamor of his own good intentions. This quiet journey of Masa, the silence seller, gently reminds us of a fundamental truth, that often what we seek most ardently outside ourselves is already present within. How often do we, in our earnest pursuit of peace or happiness or success, create such a flurry of activity, such a constant striving, that we inadvertently push away the very thing we desire? We believe that by doing more, by acquiring more, by controlling more, we will finally achieve a state of contentment. But sometimes, the truest peace is not found in the external production of quiet, but in the internal cessation of striving. It is not about silencing the world around us, but about quieting the world within. It is not a thing to be sold or bought, or even meticulously crafted, but a natural state that emerges when we release our need to control, to analyze, to achieve. It is a space that opens when we simply allow ourselves to be, without agenda, without expectation, without effort. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported. But for Masa, even with his body supported, the inner clamor persisted. The quiet frustration, that gentle weariness that settled deep in his bones, remained. He continued his days as the silence seller, a master of external quietude, yet an apprentice to his own inner world. He would sit, his eyes closed, the market sounds a distant hum, yet his thoughts would race, always racing, always planning, always judging. He was so busy creating the emptiness for others, so diligently crafting the space that would allow their worries to recede, that he had no room left for himself to simply be in it. His mind, like a busy artisan, was always arranging, always perfecting, always striving, convinced that the perfect technique, the flawless execution, would eventually bring him the peace he sought. He believed that if only he could make the external silence deep enough, pure enough, then its resonance would surely find a home within him. But it never did. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, warm shadows across the market stalls, Masa sat as usual, a quiet sentinel in the heart of the bustling trade. A client had just departed, their face soft with newly found peace, leaving behind the familiar rush of noise and, for Masa, the immediate return of his own inner turmoil. He sighed, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound, a sigh that carried the weight of years of earnest striving and unmet longing. He was about to prepare himself, to gather his internal resources for the next seeker of quietude, when he felt a small, hesitant tug on his sleeve. He opened his eyes and looked down. Standing before him was a child, no older than 7 or 8, their form small and slender, their dark hair falling loosely around their face. Their wide, curious eyes held the clear, unburdened gaze of one who simply observes, untainted by expectation or the complexities of adult understanding. The child had no coin to offer, no pressing decision to make, no clamor to escape. They had simply been watching Masa day after day, a silent observer of the silent seller and his unique craft. "Masa-san," the child began, their voice a soft, clear chime in the bustling market, a sound that cut through the air with an unexpected sharpness. "You give so much quiet to everyone, but why don't you ever keep any for yourself?" The question hung in the air, simple and direct, yet profound in its innocent clarity. It bypassed all the layers of Masa's habitual thoughts, all his intricate explanations, all his practiced techniques. It was a question born of pure, unadorned observation, untouched by the complexities of adult striving, by the need to categorize or intellectualize. It was simply the truth, spoken aloud. Masa blinked. He looked at the child, then around at the bustling market, then back at the child's earnest, unwavering face. His mouth opened, ready to offer his usual well-rehearsed explanations. He was too busy, he might have said. His purpose was to serve. His methods required focus, a constant vigilance against the encroaching noise. The silence, he would have explained, was a delicate thing, easily disturbed, a precious commodity that needed constant tending and careful production. He had to make it, after all. That was his calling. But as the first syllables formed on his tongue, something shifted. A subtle, internal tremor, like the first crack in a long-held belief. He heard his own thoughts, his own words, before they were even fully articulated. And in that moment, he heard the profound absurdity in them. Too busy creating it for others? The words echoed in his mind, stripped bare of their perceived wisdom, revealing their hollow core. Too busy producing peace to inhabit peace? Too busy selling silence to simply be silent? The logic, which had seemed so sound, so self-evident for decades, now crumbled like dry earth in his grasp. A profound tremor ran through him, a gentle shock of recognition that went deeper than any intellectual understanding. It was as if he had been walking through a dense, pervasive fog for decades, diligently mapping its contours, describing its texture, and selling tiny, ephemeral pockets of clear air to others, while never once realizing he could simply step out of the fog himself. He had been so utterly consumed by the act of creating silence, by the effort of holding it, by the striving to perfect it, that he had forgotten it was not a thing to be manufactured at all. It was not a commodity to be produced, nor a fortress to be built against the world's clamor. It was a state, it was a spaciousness, and it was always, always present, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be inhabited, not made. The child's simple question had pierced through the veil of his own doing, revealing the profound truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The child continued to look at him, patiently, expectantly, their gaze unwavering, holding the mirror of truth before Masa's weary eyes. There was no judgment in their expression, only a simple, profound curiosity, an open-hearted inquiry. And in that clear, unclouded reflection, Masa saw his own long-held misunderstanding illuminated with startling, undeniable clarity. He had believed silence was an absence of noise, an absence of worry, an absence of thought. And so, he had striven to remove these things. He had worked tirelessly to clear the space, to push away the unwanted, to quiet the external, and to control the internal. He had spent his life battling against the world and against his own mind, in the fervent belief that this struggle was the path to peace. But in that very striving, in that constant battle, he had created a new kind of noise, the clamor of his own effort, the relentless churn of his own good intentions, the subtle thrum of his own resistance. He had been so focused on the doing of silence that he had lost the being of it. He had confused the path with the destination, the technique with the truth. A profound stillness began to settle over Masa, not one he had actively created, not one born of his usual methods, but one that simply arose in the spaciousness of this sudden, gentle understanding. It was a quiet that was deeper than the mere absence of sound. It was a quiet that resonated in the space between his thoughts, in the soft, persistent beat of his own heart, in the simple, effortless act of breathing. It was the quiet that had always been there, beneath the surface of his efforts, patiently waiting for him to simply stop, to simply listen. He looked at the child, and a new smile, softer, lighter, and more genuinely peaceful than any he had offered before, bloomed on his face, reaching his eyes and softening the lines etched by years of silent striving. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't need to. The child's question had already provided the answer, an answer that was not a set of words, but a felt realization. Slowly, deliberately, Masa closed his eyes again. This time, however, there was no agenda, no technique, no effort to create silence. There was no internal preparation, no gathering of will. He simply sat. He allowed the market's sounds to wash over him, not as an intrusion, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as part of the living, vibrant tapestry of the moment. He heard the distant shouts of vendors, the rustle of fabrics in the breeze, the murmur of countless voices, the clatter of wares, the soft cooing of pigeons. And he let them simply be. He didn't try to push them away. He didn't try to analyze them, to categorize them, or to trace their origins. He didn't try to silence them. He simply observed them, without resistance, without judgment, allowing them to rise and fall, like waves on a distant, peaceful shore, without pulling him into their current. And as he did, a remarkable thing happened. The sounds did not vanish. The market continued its lively dance around him, but their power to disturb him, their ability to steal his peace, did. It simply melted away, like morning mist under the rising sun. Within the vibrant tapestry of the market's life, a deeper, more profound silence began to emerge. Not an empty silence, but a full one. It was the silence of presence, the quietude that exists beneath all activity, the spaciousness that holds all sound without being defined or diminished by it. It was the stillness of his own awareness, a vast and unperturbed inner sky that could contain all the passing clouds of thought and sound, yet remain inherently clear and serene. He felt the earth beneath him, solid and unwavering, a grounding presence. He felt the gentle rhythm of his own breath, entering and leaving, a silent current of life that was always present, always flowing. He felt the warmth of the fading sunlight on his skin, a soft touch of the world, and in all of it, in the very midst of the market's vibrant hum, he found a quiet peace that settled deep within him, a stillness that was not dependent on the absence of external noise, but on the presence of his own unresisting, open awareness. He had been so occupied producing silence, so focused on giving it away, on crafting it and protecting it, that he had indeed forgotten to simply inhabit it. He had been so busy chasing an external quiet, a quiet he believed he had to make, that he had overlooked the profound, ever-present stillness within. The child's simple question had been the key, a gentle tap that unlocked a door Masa had unknowingly barred with his own relentless efforts. his own earnest striving. This was not a silence he had manufactured. This was a silence he had recognized. It was not a product of his striving, but a gift of his release, a natural unfolding. It was a space that opened not when he pushed things away, but when he allowed them to simply be, when he ceased his struggle and simply rested in what was. It was the true nature of his own being, a wellspring of peace that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the layers of his good intentions and his ceaseless, well-meaning efforts. And as he sat there, eyes closed, a gentle smile on his face, a deep sense of calm permeating his entire being, Masa understood with a clarity that surpassed all his previous knowledge. True silence is not an external product, a commodity to be created and sold, or even a state to be achieved through strenuous effort. It is an internal state of being, a spaciousness of awareness that emerges when we release our need to control, to fix, to change, or to resist. It is a profound stillness that can hold all the sounds of the world, all the thoughts of the mind, all the sensations of the body, without being disturbed or defined by them. It is simply allowing the present moment to unfold, just as it is, without agenda, without expectation, without effort, without the constant need to do. It is the quiet art of inhabiting rather than producing. It is the gentle wisdom of simply being. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported. We pause for a breath. Tonight, we turn our gentle gaze to another soul, another quiet journey of seeking and finding, of striving and releasing. We journey to the heart of the village, to a woman whose unique gift illuminated the hidden landscapes of others, yet left her own inner world in shadow. We speak of Yua, the village dream interpreter. Yua possessed a deeply empathetic face, her soft, observant eyes seeming to hold the weight of countless unspoken dreams. Her presence was comforting, grounding, like the rich earth after a gentle rain. She often wore loose, flowing garments in muted colors, hues that seemed to absorb the anxieties of those who sought her counsel. Her voice was low and soothing, a balm to troubled souls, capable of weaving threads of meaning from the most fragmented nocturnal visions. For generations, her family had been the keepers of the village's dreams, a lineage of seers and listeners, helping people understand the subtle whispers from their subconscious minds. And Yua, perhaps more than any before her, had honed this sacred craft to an extraordinary degree. Villagers would come to her, their faces etched with confusion, their minds clouded by strange images that haunted their waking hours. A farmer, vexed by a recurring vision of barren fields, would leave Yua's simple home understanding it spoke not of crop failure, but of his own unexpressed grief. A young woman, disturbed by a dream of a locked birdcage, would find the courage to speak her suppressed desires after Yua's gentle guidance. Yua was a master of her art, a weaver of meaning, a translator of the soul's secret language. She could listen to a jumble of symbols, a winding river, a lost key, a silent forest, and with a quiet grace, reveal the underlying truth, the unspoken longing, the gentle warning that the dream was trying to convey. She brought clarity where there was confusion, understanding where there was fear, and often a profound sense of peace to those who felt adrift in the currents of their own inner lives. Her reputation spread far beyond the village, and people traveled from distant lands, carrying their intricate, perplexing dreams to her doorstep, seeking her unique wisdom. Yet despite her profound gift for others, despite the countless souls she had guided to their own inner clarity, Yua herself felt a deep and pervasive hollowness. A quiet ache resided within her, a private sorrow that no amount of external success could soothe. For Yua, the village dream interpreter, had not remembered a single one of her own dreams in 20 years. 20 years. 2 decades of leading others through their nocturnal labyrinths, while her own remained a silent, unlit chamber. She would awaken each morning with a clear head, a rested body, but with no trace, not even the faintest echo, of the visions that had visited her during the night. It was as if her own dreams had simply vanished, leaving behind an emptiness that grew with each passing dawn. This absence was more than just a lack of memory. It was a perceived disconnection from her own inner world, a profound feeling of being estranged from herself. How could she truly understand the dreams of others? She often wondered in the quiet solitude of her heart if she was blind to her own. How could she guide them to their truths if her own truth remained unseen, unvoiced, unremembered? She believed, with a quiet, persistent sadness, that her extraordinary gift for others had come at a cost, that her focus on their inner visions had somehow depleted her own, leaving her barren. The irony was not lost on her. She spent her days sifting through the symbolic landscapes of strangers, yet her own landscape was a blank, an unwritten page. She was a lantern, illuminating the path for others, while walking in a darkness that felt increasingly her own. And so, Yua began her own quiet, desperate search. Her quest was not for answers for a client, but for herself. She approached it with the same meticulous dedication she applied to her interpretations, believing that if she could simply find the right method, the right technique, the right catalyst, her dreams would surely return. She tried everything she could conceive, every remedy whispered in old wives' tales, every ritual hinted at in ancient texts. She collected special herbs under the full moon, grinding them into fragrant powders she would brew into teas, hoping their calming, dream-inducing properties would unlock the forgotten pathways of her mind. She drank infusions of mugwort and valerian root, their earthy flavors filling her mouth, their subtle energies meant to invite vivid visions. She tried tinctures made from obscure flowers, their petals gathered at dawn, believing they held the key to her lost dreams. Each night, she would prepare her chosen concoction with a hopeful heart, drinking it slowly, allowing its warmth to spread through her, then settling into her bed with a quiet prayer for remembrance. And each morning, she would awaken to the same blank slate, the same profound silence where her dreams should have been. She journeyed to sacred places, seeking the wisdom of the earth itself. She slept in ancient groves beneath the canopy of trees that had stood for centuries, their roots plunged deep into the earth's memory. She lay on smooth, cool stones by hidden springs, hoping the pure, flowing water would cleanse her mind and open it to the dream world. She spent nights in abandoned temples, their air thick with the echoes of prayers and contemplations, believing the spiritual energy of such places might awaken her dormant inner visions. She would seek out specific geological formations, places where the veil between worlds was said to be thin, convinced that the unique energies of these spots would coax her dreams back to life. But the nights passed and the mornings arrived, bringing only the same quiet emptiness, the same unremembered sleep. She exhausted herself, believing that perhaps her mind was too active, too engaged in the waking world. She pushed her body to its limits. She would work tirelessly in her garden, tending to her herbs and flowers until her muscles ached and her hands were rough with soil. She would walk for miles through the hills, ascending steep paths, feeling the burn in her legs, the wind whipping through her hair, until physical fatigue finally claimed her. She hoped that a body utterly spent, a mind too weary to resist, would finally surrender to the dream realm. She would fall into bed, heavy with exhaustion, certain that this time her efforts would bear fruit. But still, the mornings brought only the same silent disappointment. She tried dream journaling, a practice she recommended to all her clients. Each night, she would place a fresh parchment and a sharpened quill by her bedside, ready to capture the fleeting images the moment she awoke. She would lie awake for a long time, consciously setting an intention to remember, whispering to herself, "I will remember my dreams tonight. I will remember my dreams." She would fall asleep with this quiet, directive humming in her mind. But the parchment remained pristine, the quill untouched, day after day, week after week, until the blank pages became a silent testament to her ongoing failure, a stark reminder of the void within. Her home, which for others was a place of revelation and insight, became for her a place of quiet, increasing desperation. The subtle scents of her dream-inducing herbs mingled with the faint aroma of the incense she burned, not for ritual, but for comfort, hoping their calming properties might somehow coax her dreams back. Her shelves, lined with ancient texts on symbolism and archetypes, felt like a cruel mockery, filled with knowledge that illuminated everyone else's path but her own. She would sit by her window in the early morning light, watching the village awaken, a profound sadness settling over her. She saw the other villagers begin their day, some with the lingering haze of a vivid dream, others perhaps with a forgotten one, but all of them, she imagined, with the natural, unquestioned experience of dreaming. And she, the dream interpreter, felt fundamentally broken, severed from this most basic human connection to her own inner self. She felt like an incomplete vessel, a wellspring of wisdom for others, yet dry within. She helped others find their clarity, their guidance, their understanding, but her own path felt shrouded, her own inner voice muted, her own essential truth hidden behind a veil she could not pierce. She believed with every fiber of her being that her dreams were lost, perhaps forever, and with them, a vital part of herself. This persistent absence, this quiet ache, left her feeling deeply unmoored, living without the self-connection she so readily fostered in others. She had spent 2 decades striving, seeking, exerting effort, convinced that her dreams were something to be found, something to be recaptured, something that required her relentless pursuit. She believed they were external to her, lost somewhere beyond her reach, and that only through intense, focused action could she bring them back. She was caught in the very trap she helped her clients escape. The belief that the answer lay outside, that truth was something to be acquired rather than recognized. And in her tireless efforts to find what she believed was missing, she only deepened the sense of loss, the very hollowness she so desperately wished to fill. Her journey was a poignant illustration of the irony that often accompanies great gifts. The ability to see so clearly for others can sometimes blind us to the simple truths within ourselves. She had become a master of the external dream, but a stranger to her own inner landscape. She longed for a dream, any dream, to remind her of her own internal world, to reconnect her to the deeper currents of her being, to heal the profound sense of detachment that had become her constant companion. But the more she tried, the more she sought, the more elusive her own dreams seemed to become, retreating further into the silent, unremembered depths of her own mind. She was the dream interpreter, lost in her own waking dream, unable to see the profound truth that was unfolding within her all along. Her life of service, her quiet wisdom, her gentle guidance of others, all of it was a living dream, a vibrant tapestry of meaning that she simply could not perceive from within its own weave. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported. We pause for a breath. The morning light, soft and diffused through the rice paper screens of Yua's home, painted gentle patterns on the woven mats. The air was still, carrying only the faint, familiar scent of the calming herbs Yua kept, a scent that had become both a comfort and a quiet reminder of her own unfulfilled longing. She sat, as always, with an open heart and an empathetic face, across from a new client. This man, a merchant from a distant village, had come seeking clarity, troubled by a recurring dream that felt both vital and deeply perplexing. Yua listened, her soft, observant eyes fixed on his face, absorbing his words, not just the sounds, but the subtle shifts in his expression, the tremor in his voice, the unconscious gestures of his hands. She was a vessel for understanding, a quiet mirror reflecting back the truths she helped others uncover. Yet, beneath her professional calm, the familiar ache of her own dreamless nights persisted, a quiet thrumming of absence that was her constant companion. She felt the irony keenly, the profound disconnect between the vivid inner worlds she explored for others and the blank canvas of her own sleep. The merchant began to speak, his voice hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as the images of his dream unfolded. "I saw a woman," he began, his brow furrowed in concentration, "standing on a path, shrouded in a soft gray mist. But the mist, it was not cold nor frightening. It was gentle." He paused, searching for the right words. She carried no lamp, yet around her, the path ahead of others seemed to brighten. They walked towards her, and she would simply gesture, or sometimes offer a single, soft word, and suddenly, their way would become clear. Their burdens, which they had carried through the mist, seemed to lift, and they would walk on, their faces alight with understanding. Yua nodded, encouraging him, her mind already sifting through the layers of symbolism, identifying archetypes, sensing the underlying currents of his psyche. This was her gift, her profound calling. Yet, as he continued, a strange resonance began to stir within her, a subtle vibration that felt different from her usual analytical process. She never seemed to move from her spot. The merchant went on, his eyes growing wider as he recalled the dream's details. Always in that gentle mist, and her face, it was so kind, so understanding. She had eyes that seemed to hold the weight of unspoken stories, and a voice that, even in the dream, felt like a balm. He gestured vaguely, trying to capture the essence. But the most peculiar thing, Master Yua, was that while she helped everyone else find their light, her own path remained in shadow. She seemed to walk in her own darkness, or rather, to be in it, even as she brought clarity to all who sought her. As the merchant spoke these words, her own path remained in shadow. She seemed to walk in her own darkness. A profound stillness descended upon Yua. The air in the room, which moments before had felt simply still, now felt charged, alive with an unspoken truth. Her breath caught, a small, involuntary gasp that she quickly stifled. The analytical part of her mind, usually so active, suddenly went quiet. A different kind of knowing began to unfold, a recognition that bypassed words and concepts, settling instead deep in her bones. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. It was as if a long-closed door within her had just gently swung open. The client continued, oblivious, describing more details of the dream woman's compassionate gestures, her quiet strength, her unwavering presence for those who sought her guidance. And with each word, the portrait he painted became clearer, sharper, more undeniably, strikingly her. Her own empathetic face, her soft, observant eyes, that indeed seemed to hold the weight of countless unspoken dreams, her comforting, grounding presence, her low, soothing voice. He was describing her, Yua, the dream interpreter, the woman who wore loose, flowing garments in muted colors, the woman who sat in this very room, day after day, helping others navigate their shadowed paths. The darkness the dream figure walked in, or inhabited, suddenly made perfect sense. It was not a malevolent darkness, but the profound absence of her own remembered dreams, the blank canvas of her own inner world, the very hollowness she had felt for 20 years. She had been living inside the dream, the very dream of selfless service, of quiet wisdom, of gentle guidance, unable to see it from within. She had been the compassionate woman in the mist, helping everyone else see, while believing her own path was shrouded. A single silent tear traced a path down her cheek, warm and unexpected. Then another, and another, until they flowed freely, not from sorrow, but from an overwhelming sense of recognition, of release, of truth finally seen. She did not wipe them away. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the hollowness within her began to fill, not with something new, but with the quiet understanding of what had always been there. The merchant, noticing her tears, paused, concerned. "Master Yua, is something wrong? Have I spoken ill of the dream?" Yua shook her head gently, a soft, almost imperceptible smile gracing her lips through her tears. Her voice, when it came, was a whispered revelation, imbued with a profound, newfound serenity. "No, kind sir," she murmured, her eyes still shimmering with unshed tears. "You have spoken the deepest truth. You have shown me a dream I had forgotten to interpret for myself." In that moment, the relentless striving, the desperate seeking, the exhausting efforts to reclaim her lost dreams, all fell away. They had not been lost at all. She had simply been living them, embodying them, every single day, in every gentle interaction, in every moment of quiet wisdom she offered to others. Her life of service, her unwavering presence, her profound gift for illuminating the inner landscapes of others, this was her dream. This was the vibrant tapestry of meaning she had woven, strand by delicate strand, without ever perceiving its full beauty from within its own weave. She had spent 2 decades believing her dreams were external to her, lost somewhere beyond her reach, something to be acquired, to be recaptured through effort and pursuit. But they had always been internal, always present, unfolding in the very fabric of her existence. The understanding washed over her like a gentle tide, cleansing the long-held belief of her own incompleteness. She was not a broken vessel, but a wellspring of wisdom, and her own dream was the very life she lived. The profound sense of detachment, her constant companion, began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, unwavering connection to herself. She had longed for a dream, any dream, to remind her of her own internal world, to reconnect her to the deeper currents of her being. And in the most unexpected way, through the eyes and words of another, her own dream had been revealed to her, not as a fleeting image from sleep, but as the living, breathing reality of her waking life. This poignant realization, this gentle awakening, illuminated a profound truth: that often, the answers we seek so desperately, the truths we believe are lost, are not hidden in distant lands or in forgotten memories. They are not something to be found through relentless striving or to be acquired through exhaustive effort. No, the deepest truths are often already present, waiting patiently within the contours of our lives, woven into the very fabric of who we are and how we choose to be in the world. Like a painting that we stand too close to, unable to see the full composition until we step back, Yua had been too immersed in the intricate details of her own life, her own service, to perceive the larger, breathtaking masterpiece it had always been. The dream she longed for was not something to be remembered from the night, but something to be recognized in the light of day, in the compassionate acts she performed, in the quiet wisdom she shared, in the very essence of her being. Sometimes, the grandest visions, the most profound insights, are not spectacular occurrences that burst upon us with fanfare. They are quiet recognitions, subtle shifts in perspective that allow us to finally see what has always been there, patiently waiting for our acknowledging gaze. The truth often resides not in what we pursue, but in what we allow to be revealed, not in what we grasp, but in what we simply, gently recognize. It reminds us that our true selves, our deepest purposes, our most essential wisdom, are not external quests. They are inherent, unfolding within us and through us, moment by quiet moment. We are not called to find our dream, but to recognize the dream we are already living, to inhabit it fully, to embrace its wisdom, and to allow its gentle melody to resonate through every fiber of our being. This is the profound beauty of self-acceptance, the quiet liberation that comes from seeing ourselves as we truly are, whole and complete, a living embodiment of our own unique and beautiful dream. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, then slowly release it, letting go of any tension you might hold. Feel your body supported. We pause for a breath. From the quiet recognition of a dream already lived, our journey now turns to a different kind of perception, to the subtle art of measurement, and to the profound paradox of one who could measure the world but not himself. We follow the path to Jin, the weight measurer, a man whose hands held an extraordinary gift, but whose heart carried a peculiar, quiet burden. Jin was a man of impressive build, his broad shoulders speaking of physical capability, his strong hands calloused from years of work. He spent his days in the bustling granaries and quiet marketplaces, a familiar figure among the sacks of rice, the baskets of beans, the heaps of lentils. His gift was legendary, almost mythical. With a simple scoop of his hands, a gentle lift, a subtle sway, he could tell the exact weight of any grain, never needing scales, never needing the clatter and creak of mechanical balances. His estimates were always perfect, down to the last individual seed. People came from distant villages, bringing their harvests, trusting Jin's touch more than any instrument crafted by man. His dark eyes, when they focused on a pile of grain, held an intense, almost intuitive concentration, a deep connection to the very substance he was assessing. He spoke with a steady, confident voice when discussing the market's yields, his advice sought and valued. Yet, despite this profound connection to the tangible, to the heavy and the grounded, Jin carried within him a persistent, disquieting feeling. He felt his own life lacked substance, as if he might, at any moment, simply float away. There was a lightness to his step, almost a phantom quality that contradicted his appearance, a subtle unease in his dark eyes when he wasn't focused on the task at hand. He could gauge the gravity of 1,000 grains, but felt an absence of gravity within his own being. He longed for the solid, reassuring weight he so effortlessly perceived in the world around him, but felt only an elusive insubstantiality within himself. This feeling, this quiet fear of being unmoored, of lacking the essential weight that anchored others to the earth, had begun subtly, like a whisper on the wind. Perhaps it was the contrast with his craft, the constant handling of dense, heavy sacks, the precise understanding of mass and gravity that made his own perceived lightness so stark. He would watch the farmers, their bodies rooted, their movements solid, and feel a pang of longing for that same deep-seated stability. He saw the way the wind tugged at leaves, but how the stones remained firm, unmoving, deeply settled. He craved the unmoving, rooted quality of the stone, but felt himself more akin to the leaf, ready to be carried off by the slightest breeze. So, Jin began, in his quiet, determined way, to try and give himself the weight he so desperately craved. His efforts were earnest, almost childlike in their simplicity, yet imbued with a profound seriousness. He started by carrying stones, not small pebbles, but smooth, river-worn stones, heavy in the palm, chosen for their density and their steadfast refusal to be moved. He would place them in his pockets, one in each, feeling their reassuring drag against his thighs as he walked. The weight was comforting at first, a physical anchor, a constant reminder that he was indeed connected to the earth. He would shift them, feel their cool solidity, a small secret ballast against the perceived lightness of his own being. He wore heavy clothes, even in the warmth of summer. Thick, homespun linen tunics, layers of coarse wool, garments that clung to him, that made him feel substantial, present, undeniably there. He avoided light silks and flowing cottons, fearing they would only exacerbate his feeling of ethereal fragility. He wanted fabric that had heft, that settled heavily on his frame, that created a physical barrier against the feeling of translucence. He would shrug his shoulders, feeling the comforting pressure of the cloth, hoping its weight would somehow seep into his very bones, giving him the density he believed he lacked. His diet, too, became a deliberate attempt to ground himself. He sought out dense foods, heavy, dark breads baked for days, thick stews rich with root vegetables, hearty porridges that sat like a stone in his stomach. He eschewed light fruits and airy pastries, convinced they would only contribute to his perceived lack of substance. Each meal became a ritual, a conscious act of trying to absorb weight, to build up an internal density that would match the external solidity he so admired. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, imagining the food settling, rooting him, making him more substantial with every mouthful. He hoped that if he consumed enough weight, enough groundedness, it would eventually become a part of him. He even began to walk differently. Instead of his naturally light step, he would consciously place his feet firmly, deliberately, feeling the earth beneath each heel, each sole. He would imagine roots growing from his feet, anchoring him deeply into the soil with every stride. He tried to mimic the lumbering gait of the oxen, the steady, unhurried pace of the old farmers, believing that if he walked with enough intentional heaviness, it would eventually manifest as an internal truth. His movements, once fluid and almost effortless, became strained, burdened by this self-imposed quest for gravity. These efforts, however, brought him no lasting peace. The stones in his pockets eventually felt like a burden, a physical drag that tired his muscles without truly altering his inner state. The heavy clothes made him sweat, chafed his skin and only amplified the underlying feeling of being an imposter, a man trying to be something he was not. The dense foods, while filling, left him sluggish, his digestive system constantly working. Yet the feeling of internal weightlessness persisted, a phantom ache in his core. And the deliberate, heavy steps only made him feel more disconnected from his natural rhythm, more aware of the effort involved in simply moving through the world. He would stand in the granary, his hands deftly measuring sacks of millet, feeling their rich, satisfying weight, understanding their density with an almost supernatural clarity. Then he would look down at his own hands, so capable, so knowing, and feel a profound disconnect. Why could he understand the gravity of everything else, but not his own? Why did he feel so unmoored, so insubstantial, when he was surrounded by such solid, undeniable proof of existence? He would sigh, a quiet, internal sound, adding another stone to his pocket, pulling his heavy tunic tighter around his frame. Jin believed that his unique gift, his ability to perceive weight, was a cruel irony, highlighting his own perceived flaw. He saw it as a constant reminder of what he lacked, rather than an expression of his inherent nature. He thought he needed to become more like the things he measured, heavy, grounded, substantial. He believed that if he could only acquire enough external weight, enough physical density, he would finally feel complete, finally rooted in the world. He was, in his earnestness, working against the very essence of his being, trying to force himself into a mold that did not fit, convinced that his true self was somehow deficient. This persistent striving, this desperate attempt to compensate for a perceived flaw, only deepened his internal struggle. The more he tried to be heavy, the more acutely aware he became of his own lightness. The more he sought to ground himself through external means, the more elusive his inner sense of stability became. He was caught in a quiet, relentless cycle of seeking and failing, each attempt reinforcing the belief that he was inherently lacking, that he was somehow not enough, that his true nature was a weakness to be overcome. His mind churned with thoughts of weight. How much was enough? What was the perfect density for a man? He would observe the market vendors, the farmers, the monks, trying to find an example of perfect, grounded being. But everyone simply was, without effort, without conscious striving for gravity. Their weight was simply a given, an unquestioned aspect of their existence. Only he, Jin, the weight measurer, felt this constant need to acquire it, to cling to it, to fabricate it for himself. He carried his secret burden with quiet dignity, his outward confidence in his craft masking the deep unease within. He was a master of his domain, a pillar of the granary, yet in his own heart, he felt like a wisp of smoke, liable to dissipate with the slightest breeze. He wanted to be a mountain, but felt himself to be merely a cloud, beautiful perhaps, but without true substance. And so, the stones in his pockets grew heavier, the layers of his clothes thicker, the foods he consumed denser, all in a silent, desperate prayer to find the gravity he believed he had lost, or perhaps had never truly possessed. His journey was one of trying to fill a perceived void with external matter, unknowingly pushing away the very gift that defined him. His mind churned with thoughts of weight. How much was enough? What was the perfect density for a man? He would observe the market vendors, the farmers, the monks, trying to find an example of perfect, grounded being. But everyone simply was, without effort, without conscious striving for gravity. Their weight was simply a given, an unquestioned aspect of their existence. Only he, Jin, the weight measurer, felt this constant need to acquire it, to cling to it, to fabricate it for himself. He carried his secret burden with quiet dignity, his outward confidence in his craft masking the deep unease within. He was a master of his domain, a pillar of the granary, yet in his own heart he felt like a wisp of smoke, liable to dissipate with the slightest breeze. He wanted to be a mountain, but felt himself to be merely a cloud, beautiful perhaps, but without true substance. And so, the stones in his pockets grew heavier, the layers of his clothes thicker, the foods he consumed denser, all in a silent, desperate prayer to find the gravity he believed he had lost, or perhaps had never truly possessed. His journey was one of trying to fill a perceived void with external matter, unknowingly pushing away the very gift that defined him. The granary was a place of comforting routine, a symphony of hushed rustles and soft thuds. Sacks of millet, rice, and barley stood in orderly rows, each holding its distinct density, its unique story of the earth. Jin moved among them with practiced grace. His hands, though burdened by the stones in his pockets, still possessed an uncanny sensitivity, a profound understanding of the grain within each Hessian weave. Each day was a repetition of this quiet ballet, lifting, assessing, stacking, his mind perpetually engaged with the physics of weight, while his heart wrestled with his own perceived lack of it. One afternoon, the air was warm and still, carrying the sweet, dry scent of stored harvest. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the high windows, illuminating the quiet industry of the granary. Jin was preparing a shipment for the distant mountain monasteries, a collection of baskets that needed to be filled with specific measures of grain. He moved methodically, his heavy tunic clinging to him, the familiar drag of the stones, a dull ache at his sides. He had just finished weighing a large sack of lentils, feeling its dense, almost liquid weight settle in his hands before transferring it to a waiting basket. He then turned to another basket, larger still, which usually held the coarser, heavier grains like barley or oats. It was a basket he often used for bulk orders, one that, by its very size and typical contents, suggested considerable heft. He reached for it, his broad shoulders tensing, his powerful hands extending, ready to grasp the sturdy wicker handles. He anticipated the familiar resistance, the deep, satisfying tug of a substantial load. His muscles braced, preparing for the customary effort of the lift. He had done this countless times, his body instinctively knowing the dance of gravity, the precise expenditure of energy required. But as his fingers closed around the handles, as he began to exert the force to hoist it, there was nothing. No resistance, no deep tug. Only an astonishing, jarring emptiness. The basket, despite its imposing size and its usual purpose, was completely, utterly empty. His hands, so accustomed to perceiving the most subtle nuances of weight, registered the absolute absence of it with a shock that vibrated through his entire being. His body, prepared for a struggle, found itself lifting only air, a mere ghost of the weight it had expected. For a fraction of a second, he simply froze, the empty basket held aloft, his mind struggling to reconcile his expectation with the undeniable reality of his senses. Then, a sound, clear and unexpected, escaped his lips. It began as a soft expulsion of air, a gasp that turned into a chuckle, and then a full, ringing laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years, a genuine, unburdened laugh that echoed, light and free, through the quiet granary. It was not a laugh of frustration, nor of self-reproach, but a laugh of pure, sudden, liberating clarity. In that very instant, as the last echo of his laughter faded, the truth, so simple and profound, settled into his heart. He looked at the empty basket, then at his own hands, still holding it with effortless ease. He looked down at the stones, still heavy in his pockets, and a wave of understanding washed over him, dissolving years of self-imposed illusion. How could he have been so blind? His unique ability, his extraordinary gift for measuring weight, came not from his own density, but precisely from his own lightness. To feel the subtle variations of gravity in every grain, every sack, every basket, he needed to be a finely tuned instrument, unburdened by his own internal weight. If he himself were heavy, dense, and immovable, how could he perceive the delicate nuances of others' weight? His own lightness was not a flaw, but the very foundation of his sensitivity, the secret to his profound connection with the material world. It was his clarity, his emptiness of self-imposed physical ballast that allowed him to truly feel the weight of all things. He had been trying to destroy the very quality that gave him his gift. He had been so intent on acquiring what he thought he lacked that he had overlooked the profound strength in what he already possessed. His perceived weakness was, in fact, his greatest power. His feeling of being unmoored, of being like a wisp of smoke, was actually the very condition that allowed him to dance so delicately with the forces of gravity, to understand them with an intimacy no one else could match. Slowly, deliberately, Jin reached into his pockets. One by one, he pulled out the smooth, heavy stones that had been his constant companions, his silent, self-imposed anchors. He looked at them, not with resentment, but with a quiet understanding, a gentle farewell. He placed them gently on a nearby wooden beam, watching them settle there, no longer a part of him. As they left his pockets, a subtle shift occurred within him. The physical drag was gone, but more importantly, the psychological burden, the constant low hum of anxiety about his own substance, began to dissipate. He felt a different kind of lightness now, not the phantom, unsettling lightness he had feared, but a liberating, expansive lightness, a feeling of freedom and alignment. The heavy clothes, which had once felt like a protective shell, now felt constricting, unnecessary. He made a silent vow to shed them, to embrace fabrics that allowed him to move and breathe with his own natural ease. The dense foods, too, lost their allure. He recognized that true nourishment came from balance, from listening to his body's needs, not from a desperate attempt to weigh himself down. For the first time in his life, Jin felt truly grounded, not because he had acquired external weight, but because he had released the need for it. He felt rooted, not by clinging to something outside himself, but by settling into the quiet truth of who he was. His strength was not in being a mountain, but in being the air that allowed the mountain to be perceived. His gravity was not in mass, but in the profound acceptance of his own unique, sensitive nature. He stood in the granary, the sun now lower, casting long golden shadows across the floor. He lifted another basket, this one full of millet, and weighed it in his hands. The familiar, comforting density was there, but now his perception of it was clearer, purer, unclouded by his own internal struggle. He understood that our unique qualities, those aspects of ourselves we might perceive as flaws or weaknesses, are often the very source of our greatest gifts, our deepest wisdom. The path to self-understanding is not found in trying to change who we are, but in embracing the essential, unadorned truth of our being. We are not meant to be copies of others or perfect ideals, but simply ourselves in all our particular, beautiful, and inherently wise forms. To accept this, to release the struggle against our own nature, is to find a profound and unshakable ground beneath our feet. We pause to breathe. We pause to breathe. Now let us turn our gaze to a place where light and shadow dance with ancient rhythms, to a temple nestled deep in a valley where pilgrims often journey, seeking solace and blessing. Here, for 30 long years, lived a woman named Sana. Her sacred duty was to tend the temple's eternal flame, a vibrant, ceaseless fire that glowed with a soft, unwavering light, a symbol of hope and enduring spirit for all who came. Sana moved with an almost ritualistic grace, her hands practiced and precise as she added fuel, cleared ash, and ensured the flame never faltered. Her face, though marked by the passage of time, held a serene quality, a quiet dignity that suited her solemn role. Her movements were economical, each gesture imbued with purpose, honed by decades of devotion. She wore thick, dark robes, even in the height of summer, a practical attire for her work, yet they also served another, more personal purpose. For despite her fiery duty, despite the constant warmth that emanated from the temple's heart, Sana felt a pervasive, deep-seated coldness inside her. It was a subtle chill, not a shiver that shook her body, but a persistent internal frost that seemed to settle in her bones, in the deepest corners of her being. She would watch the pilgrims, their faces warmed by the flame's glow, their hands outstretched to receive its blessing, and a quiet ache would stir within her. She was the keeper of warmth, the dispenser of light, yet she herself felt cold, always cold. She often shivered, a barely perceptible tremor, even when the sun beat down outside. Even when the air in the temple was thick with the gentle heat of the fire, she would pull her heavy robes tighter, wrap her arms around herself, trying to hold on to some elusive warmth that always seemed to slip through her fingers. She began to believe, in her quiet moments of contemplation, that the flame itself was somehow drawing her heat, absorbing her own inner warmth, leaving her depleted as it blessed those who sought its solace. It was a subtle, insidious thought, a quiet fear that her very service, her profound dedication, was slowly extinguishing her own vitality, leaving her an empty vessel from which warmth had been siphoned. Her days were a constant vigil, her attention always outward, focused on the needs of the flame, on the needs of the pilgrims. She poured her energy into maintaining the external fire, ensuring its steady glow, its consistent heat. There was always a task, always a need, always the sacred duty that demanded her unwavering vigilance. She believed that by keeping the flame alive for others, she was fulfilling her purpose, but in doing so, she had subtly, unknowingly, neglected her own inner hearth. She had given so much of herself, so continuously, so completely, that she had forgotten to keep a little something for herself, a flicker of warmth for her own quiet being. Her inner flame, once bright and vibrant, had dwindled to a barely embers, obscured by the smoke of endless external focus. Then, one brisk autumn morning, a persistent cough turned into a fever, a deep weariness that settled into Sana's limbs and refused to be shaken. Her body, usually so resilient, so accustomed to its tireless routine, finally rebelled. She felt heavy, achy, too weak to rise from her simple mat. It was an unusual occurrence, for Sana had rarely known illness in her long years of service. The temple elders, seeing her condition, gently insisted she rest. Another, a younger acolyte, was called to tend the eternal flame, a temporary changing of the guard. Sana, despite her physical discomfort, felt a tremor of anxiety. Who would watch over the fire with the same devotion, the same meticulous care? How could she rest, knowing her sacred duty lay in another's hands. But her body simply refused to obey her will, holding her captive on her mat, forcing her into a stillness she had not known in decades. She lay in her small, quiet room, the sound of the temple's daily life muted by the thick walls. The usual soft crackle and hiss of the flame, a sound that had been a constant companion in her waking and sleeping hours, was now absent. There was only the gentle rhythm of her own breathing, the soft rustle of the wind outside, and the occasional distant murmur of voices. Days turned into a week, and the fever slowly receded, leaving her body weak, but her mind clearer than it had been in years. As the deep aches began to subside, a subtle, almost imperceptible sensation began to stir within her. It started as a faint tingling in her fingertips, then spread through her hands, up her arms, and into her chest. It was a warmth, gentle and persistent, like the first tentative rays of morning sun on a cold stone. For the first time in decades, she felt it, a deep, pervasive warmth spreading through her body from within. It was not the external heat of the temple flame, but an internal glow, a quiet radiance that seemed to originate from the very center of her being. She lay there, simply feeling it, allowing it to expand, to fill every part of her. It was a sensation so profound, so unfamiliar, that tears welled in her eyes, silent and unexpected. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth wash over her, a wave of profound understanding slowly dawning in her heart. The flame had not been stealing her warmth. She had been extinguishing her own inner flame through constant vigilance and external focus. She had been so dedicated to keeping that fire alive, the one that blessed pilgrims and lit the temple, that she had forgotten to tend to the fire within herself. She had neglected her own needs, ignored the quiet whispers of her body and spirit, believing that her purpose lay solely in outward service. The coldness she had felt for so long was not a natural state, nor was it a consequence of her sacred duty. It was the chill of a hearth untended, a fire left to dwindle, its embers slowly fading beneath layers of ash. By constantly directing her energy outward, by always focusing on the needs of others, she had inadvertently starved her own source of warmth, leaving it to grow dim. But now, in this forced stillness, in this quiet respite from her duties, the embers had begun to glow again. The stillness had allowed her to feel what had always been there, waiting patiently to be rekindled. The warmth was not something she needed to seek or draw from an external source. It was inherent, a part of her own essential nature, simply waiting for her attention, for her gentle care. Her illness, which had felt like a burden, now felt like a profound gift, a sacred pause that had allowed her to reconnect with herself. It was a lesson in the delicate balance of giving and receiving, of tending to the world while also nurturing the precious, vital flame within one's own heart. To truly serve, she realized, one must also be whole, replenished, and warm. One cannot pour from an empty vessel, nor can one truly radiate warmth to others if one's own inner light has grown cold. This gentle awakening revealed a profound truth. Our deepest energies, our most vital warmth, are not limitless resources to be endlessly expended without replenishment. To constantly give, to perpetually focus on external duties and the needs of the world, without turning inward to nurture our own being, is to risk becoming depleted, to risk dimming our own light. The pervasive coldness Sana had felt was a subtle cry from her neglected self, a quiet plea for attention, for care, for the simple act of turning inward. It reminded her that self-sacrifice when taken to an extreme, can become a form of self-extinguishment, leaving us hollow even as we appear to shine for others. True service, true warmth, flows not from depletion, but from a replenished, vibrant source within. We pause to breathe. We pause to breathe. As her strength returned, Sana rose from her mat, her movements slow and deliberate, imbued with a newfound grace. She walked back to the temple's sacred hearth, the familiar warmth now a comforting presence, no longer a source of subtle dread. The flame still danced, bright and unwavering, casting its golden light into the quiet space. But Sana's gaze was different now. She saw the fire not as a demanding master, but as a mirror, reflecting a deeper, more profound warmth that now resonated within her own being. She tended the flame with the same reverence, the same meticulous care she had always shown, stirring the embers, adding fresh wood, ensuring its steady glow. Yet, there was a subtle shift in her posture, a lightness in her touch. Her attention was no longer solely outward, no longer a constant vigilance against perceived depletion. She felt the gentle ebb and flow of her own energy, honoring its presence, nurturing its quiet strength. She understood now that true service, true giving, emanated from a place of fullness, from a wellspring of inner warmth that needed to be tended just as carefully as the sacred fire itself. She would pause, now and then, to simply feel the warmth within her chest, a soft, persistent glow that asked for nothing but her quiet acknowledgement. It was a warmth that belonged to her, a flame that burned independently of the temple's fire, yet complemented it, enriching her capacity to serve, to be present, to radiate a genuine kindness that touched all who approached the hearth. The pervasive coldness, the subtle chill that had defined so many of her years, had melted away, replaced by a quiet, abiding peace, a deep and satisfying warmth that radiated from her heart. She had learned that to truly tend the eternal flame, one must first tend the eternal flame within. Her story, Sana's journey from outward striving to inner warmth, is the final thread in a tapestry we have woven together, a melody composed not of grand pronouncements, but of quiet awakenings. It is the unseen melody that runs through all our experiences, a harmony found in the spaciousness of release, in the gentle art of letting go. We have wandered through quiet valleys and mist-shrouded peaks, by the ocean's edge and in bustling markets, meeting earnest souls, each seeking a truth they believed lay just beyond their grasp, and each, in their own unique way, discovered that the truth was always present, waiting to be perceived once the striving ceased, once the hands opened, once the mind quieted. We remember Kusa, the bell ringer, who strained and struggled to hear the bell's true, far-reaching sound, only to find it in the silence after the strike, in the space that followed her surrender. She learned that by letting go of her desperate need to hear, she allowed the unseen melody of the bell's resonance to finally touch her heart. And Ito, the meticulous mapmaker, who created perfect charts but felt perpetually lost. It was only when his life's work was consumed by fire, when he was forced to navigate by the feel of the earth and the whisper of the wind, that he truly found his way. He learned that the living territory could not be contained by lines and ink, and that true orientation comes from within, not from external guides. Ray, the incense master, believed her craft was lost when her sense of smell vanished, feeling like an imposter. Yet, in her quiet observation, she discovered a richer tapestry of perception, the dance of the smoke, the subtle changes in the air, the warmth in her hands. She learned that what is lost can reveal a deeper form of knowing, a symphony of senses that had always been present, waiting to be acknowledged. Nami, the tide reader, burdened by generations of ancestral knowledge, drowned herself in calculations, trying to master the ocean's rhythm. It was only when she let go of her complex formulae, when she simply sat by the water and allowed it to speak to her directly, that she heard the ocean's true, unspoken whisper, tuning into the deep intuition that had guided her grandfather. Old Mesa, the silent seller, created quiet spaces for others, but found his own mind a constant whirlwind. He learned that silence was not a commodity to be produced, but a state to inhabit, an inner stillness that could be found even amidst the market's clamor, simply by allowing sounds to be without resistance. Yua, the dream interpreter, helped countless others unravel their inner mysteries, yet felt a profound hollowness from not remembering her own dreams. Her awakening came when she recognized her own compassionate life, her quiet wisdom and service, as the dream she had been living all along, a truth so close she had been unable to see it from within. Jin, the weight measurer, with his extraordinary gift for sensing substance, felt insubstantial himself, trying to ground his being with heavy stones. He discovered his gift sprang precisely from his own lightness, realizing that his true strength lay in embracing his inherent nature, not in trying to become something he was not. And Taro, the fountain guardian, who for decades served the healing waters, believing healing flowed only one way, from the fountain to the recipient. He carried a quiet resentment, a subtle ache, never allowing himself to partake of the very waters he offered to others. His understanding dawned as he realized that true healing was reciprocal, that in his selfless service, in the act of giving without expectation, he was himself healed. He learned that the profound nourishment he sought was not just in the water, but in the open-hearted act of sharing it, a continuous flow that enriched both giver and receiver. Finally, we recall Tammy, the wind catcher, whose brilliant machine sought to harness and control the untamed forces of nature. She learned that some of life's greatest powers are not meant to be possessed, but to be experienced. When her elaborate creations shattered, she stood with empty hands uplifted, feeling the raw, exhilarating force of the wind, discovering that its true power was felt most profoundly in the spaciousness of release, in the freedom of simply being present with what is. Each journey, each quiet awakening points to the same profound truth, that wisdom, clarity, peace, and warmth are not found by striving, by grasping, by external control, or by endlessly seeking for something that is absent. They are found by letting go, by recognizing what is already present, by trusting the innate wisdom that resides within, and by simply inhabiting the moment, fully and gently. This unseen melody is not a sound that can be captured, but a resonance that can be felt, a harmony that emerges when we cease our striving and allow ourselves to simply be. It is the quiet understanding that everything we truly need, every answer we seek, every comfort we long for, is already here, within us, waiting for our gentle attention. Now, as our journey together draws to a close, I invite you to bring this quiet understanding into your own being. Feel your body resting, supported, allowing any remaining tension to simply melt away. Release your breath slowly, gently, letting go of any lingering thoughts, any worries, any need to do anything at all. Feel your feet, heavy and grounded. Feel your legs, soft and relaxed. Allow your hips to sink deeper, your abdomen to soften, your chest to expand and contract with the gentle rhythm of your breath. Feel your shoulders release, your arms grow heavy, your hands resting softly, open and receptive. Allow your neck to lengthen, your jaw to unclench, your facial muscles to relax. Feel the gentle weight of your head, supported and at ease. You are whole. You are complete. You are exactly where you need to be. There is nothing to fix, nothing to seek. Simply rest in this moment, in the quiet wisdom that has unfolded, in the gentle truth of the unseen melody. Allow this deep peace to settle within you, to fill every part of your being. Carry this understanding with you into your dreams, into your waking hours, into the quiet moments of your life. Rest now, deeply and peacefully. The unseen melody gently guides you to sleep,